Imagine the hush of an ancient evening. The sky folds itself into shadow, and across small towns and quiet countryside paths, the last streaks of sunlight fade into dusk. The world grows softer, as though everything has exhaled and found its place. In the quiet, in simple homes built of clay and stone, fires are coaxed into gentle flames. Lamps are lit, their light spilling not in brilliance, but in a calm, flickering glow that never startles thigh. This was the rhythm of life for Switch, no sudden glare, only the patient tending of flame, passed down as a ritual from generation to generation. The air held the faint aroma of smoke, of oil warming in carved vessels, of wood gently crackling at the hearth, scents that belonged not only to houses but to the very idea of night itself. Streets, narrow and winding, were not darkened with fear, but softened with mystery, touched only by small lights at doorways or the shimmer of embers glowing quietly within courtyards. In villages, shepherds returned from the fields, their steps slow and measured, while families gathered around the hearth. In cities, the glow of countless little flames marked taverns, shops, and shrines, each one a small promise against darkness. The lamp was never only a tool, it was a companion. Its flame kept silence from becommingliness, its warmth kept cold stone walls from feeling empty. A child falling asleep might watch the soft sway-off shadows cast by a flickering wick, drifting into dreams guided by that gentle pulse of light. A mother spinning wool or a father repairing a tool might keep working after sundown, the lamp beside them not just illuminating their hands but shaping the rhythm of their tasks. Priests kept lamps burning in temples, for gods were never left in the dark, and travelers carried torches or small lanterns, their glow marking a fragile but determined path through unknown roads. In these moments, light was more than bright, was security, ritual, memory, and comfort woven into one fragile flame. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the quiet music of it, the faintness of olive oil feeding a wick, the tiny crackle as soot gathered at its edge, the muted clink as clay lamps were set down on wooden tables, each sound folded into the hush of evening life, joining the distant song of crickets, the murmurs of neighbors behind thin walls, the occasional bark of a dog keeping watch. Night in the ancient world was not silent, but it was subdued, and the lamp was at the center of it. People shaped their days around daylight, but lamps allowed them to extend the evening, to eat together, to talk softly, to share stories or prayers before sleep. Imagine walking through a Roman street or a Greek village. Lamps hanging at doorways cast soft circles of light that overlap faintly, leaving long stretches of shadow in between. To the modern eye, it might seem dim. To them, it was enough. It was a rhythm, a balance, a language of shadows and light. Lamps themselves carried stories in their shape and decoration. Some were simple, little more than clay bowls with a others bore patterns of vines, fish, or mythological figures pressed into their surfaces. A wealthy family might own bronze or silver lamps, polished so that flame gleamed against metal. Yet no matter the material, their purpose was the same too: hold a fragile light steady against the great weight of night. Coins paid for oil as carefully as they bought bread, and households measured their comfort not only in food stored, but in oil kept safe for evenings to come. To run out of oil was to surrender hours of wakeful warmth, to fall into darkness earlier than planned. Thus, every flicker of a lamp was a reminder of provision, of small security earned and preserved. When travelers returned from long roads, they spoke not only of strange places, but of the lamps they had seen: great braziers blazing in temples of the East, lanterns swinging in desert caravans, torchlight reflecting gross harbors filled with ships. Light was a universal comfort, yet always tied to its own culture, its own customs. In one place, lamps burned perfumed oils, filling the air with fragrance. In another, tallow candles glowed with heavier smoke, their light mingling with the smell of fat. In yet another, elaborate chandeliers of bronze or iron cast light across banquet halls, where music and laughter spilled late into the night. But for most people, in most evenings, light meant a single lamp, humble and steady, placed at the center of the home. This lamp shaped dreams as much as they shaped waking hours. Imagine lying on a simple bed of straw or woven cloth, watching as flame cast shifting patterns upon the ceiling. Shadows moved like figures in a story, dancing with every flicker. To fall asleep was to let those shapes fade into darkness, to carry the glow within the mind even after the eyes had closed. To wake in the night and see a lamp still glowing was reassurance that their household was safe, that the fire had not gone out, that warmth and protection still lingered in the room. Even in temples and sanctuaries, lamps were left to burn through the night as offerings, their flames embodying devotion. Worshippers believed gods and spirits required light as much as humans did that. Darkness without flame was absence, while light was presence, blessing, and watchful care. The story we follow tonight is not a tale of battles or rulers. It is gentler, quieter. It belongs to the countless evenings lived by ordinary people, evenings marked by the tending of flame. From the shepherd returning late with his flock, setting a lamp by his meal of bread and cheese, to the artisan finishing a tool under dim light, to the mother soothing a child whose fears faded as the lamp glowed. This is the story of how night was softened, made livable, made tender. Without lamps, darkness would have been vast and heavy. With them, night became a companion, a time not only to sleep, but to gather, to think, to imagine. So as you listen, let your breathing slow, let your thoughts soften. Picture the glow of a small lamp resting on a low table, its flame steady and calm. Let its quiet warmth guide you into the rhythm of the past. The history of ancient lamps is not of sudden events, but of continuity, of lives shaped in patient repetition. It is a history of comfort, of the human desire not to banish darkness, but to live gently within it. Tonight, we walk not through wars or empires, but through doorways and alleys, into temple sand, simple homes, tracing the faint glow that once guarded every night. This is the story of lamps, their quiet their tender glow, their poetry of light and time. The day was always moving toward night. In the ancient world, people measured their lives not with the tick-off clocks, but with the turn of shadows, the slow sweep of the sun across rooftops, and the way the air shifted as evening came. The light of the day was never sudden, never harsh in its departure. It slipped away gradually, as if the earth itself sighed and let its brightness sink behind hills, walls, and trees. When the last stretch of sunlight faded, the world entered into a softer state, and with it came the quiet ritual of flame. The first sparks of evening belonged not to torches that blazed for spectacle, nor to the grand bonfires of ceremony, but to the small, simple flames of daily life. A Greek farmer, returning home from fields of grain, might reach for the clay lamp sitting by his door, shaped in a modest mold, with a small spout and a wick of linen. It was filled with olive oil, pressed from the trees that dotted the hillsides. He touched a coal from the hearth to the wick, and slowly the flame caught. It did not roar, it did not dazzle, it simply breathed into being, and its glow was enough. In Rome, a household, not much different in its rhythms, would also turn to light. The city streets were still alive, with murmurs, vendors closing stalls, neighbors exchanging words in doorways, but inside the domus, within walls of brick and plaster, the day was already dim. There, a clay lamp might wait on a small table, stamped with a sign that gave it character. Perhaps it bore the image of a bird, or of the sun itself, or maybe only a few faint lines worn smooth by years of use. It, too, was lit with deliberation. The flame coaxed patiently until the glow steadied, filling the atrium with a calm halo that softened plaster walls and cast long shadows across tiled floors. Further east, in Egypt, light came differently, but with the same care. In the humblest of homes, reeds dipped in animal fat rested in shallow bowls. When touched with a small flame, they burned with a steady, low glow. The scent of the fat was heavy, perhaps even unpleasant, but it was familiar. It was the smell of safety, of the night contained, and made less threatening. In richer households, oil was also used, poured into decorated lamps, that shone brightly against mud brick walls painted in faded colors. No matter the land or the material, the ritual was alike. The day gave way to night, and with human hands, the dark was softened. The first sparks were never taken lightly. Lighting a lamp was practical. Yes, it allowed meals to continue, tools to be put away, and children to be calmed before bed. But there was more to it. To light a lamp was to declare that the household was ready. It was to say that the work of the day had ended, that rest could begin, and that the boundary between the outside world and the home was firm. In that glow, people gathered. Families sat near flames to share bread, to listen, to speak softly of what tomorrow might hold. The glow became a companion, steady and quiet, holding its place against the vast expanse of night beyond the door. There is something profoundly human in that moment, the strike of the first flame. It was small, fleeting, and fragile, yet it meant so much. Imagine an ancient street at Skesk. The stones beneath your feet are cooling from the heat of the sun. The air holds the scent of dust and distant fires. Slowly, one by one, lights appear in doorways, each tiny flame pushing back the dark. There is no sudden brightness to overwhelm the senses, only scattered dots of glow, like a constellation that belongs not to the sky but to the earth. This was how safety was drawn. It was not the protection of walls alone, but of light, tended by hand, cared for, kept alive through long hours when the world was otherwise veiled in shadow. People trusted these flames. They were fragile, but in their fragility lay a kind of intimacy. To light a lamp was to tend to life itself, to guard against chaos, and to create a bubble of order, warmth, and comfort. Think of a Roman shopkeeper who, after a day of weighing goods and haggling with customers, sits down as the last light leaves sky. He counts his coins by the glow of a small lamp, stacking them slowly, listening to their faint clink. Theolite is not bright enough to see the detail of each coin, but it is steady enough to see their shapes, their edges, their promise of tomorrow's bread. Or imagine an Egyptian mother, her child restless at night. She lights a reed in places it in a small dish of oil, and the flicker distracts the child long enough for calm to return. The flame comes a lullaby without words, a quiet guardian watching through the hours until sleep takes hold. Even in temples, where the sacred met the ordinary, lamps had meaning. Priests tended to lamps not just as tools of vision, but as signs of the divine. The flame itself was seen as a link between the human and the eternal, a way to keep the presence of gods alive in darkened halls. But in homes, the meaning was gentler. It was not a symbol, a fetidity, but of immediacy of the here and now, of family and food, and the closeness of walls that protected against the vastness outside. When we picture the ancient world, we often imagine the grandeur, columns rising, the sky, armies marching in formation, rulers with crowns and laurel leaves. Yet, in truth, the first sparks of evening were as important as any triumph. For most people, this was life. It was the daily rhythm that gave shape to existence. The act of lighting a lamp carried no drama, no spectacle, but it carried meaning that touched every heart, every home. As the hours moved forward, lamps burned low. Oil was precious. Fat was hard-earned. Families did not waste what little they had. A single flame was often enough, and rooms glowed dimly, encouraging rest more than activity. Shadows deepened in corners, and the world became smaller, quieter. It was in these hours that stories were told, that thoughts slowed, that dreams began their work. The flame's gentleness across the wall was the backdrop for memory and imagination alike. The soundscape of these evenings was simple, a faint crackle of wick, a quiet murmur of voices, the occasional bark of a dog in the distance, or the whisper of night insects through open windows. Together, these sounds formed a kind of lullaby, unplanned yet comforting. They told those within that the world was alive but calm, that the night was present but softened by its persistence of human care. There is an intimacy in darkness shared with others. To sit around a small flame was to acknowledge not only the presence of light, but the closeness of those who shared it. The circle of glow was also a circle of community. Beyond it lay the unknown, but within it there was familiarity, safety, and Araminda, that even in the deepest night, humanity had found a way to endure. This chapter of history, these first sparks of evening, may seem small compared to the tales of kings and battles. Yet it is in this smallness that we find the true fabric of daily life. Lamps did not change empires, but they shaped every evening. For those Hollywood within them, they were the unsung companions of countless nights, their steady glow making possible 30th of rest, reflection, and renewal. When we close our eyes now and imagine those nights, we might feel the weight of time slipping away. The hum of modern electricity fades, replaced by the soft flicker of flame. We step into that quiet world, where the simple act of lighting a lamp meant the difference between shadow and warmth, between silence and conversation, between fear and comfort. And so, as the ancient world slipped each day into night, it was the first sparks the tiny flames coaxed from oil, fat, or reed that reminded humanity of its resilience. Small though they were, they stood against the dark with quiet strength. Their glow was not just practical, it was poetry written in light, a daily promise that night could be faced with calm, and that tomorrow would come with the rising sun. The hearth was not just a place for cooking, it was the quiet center of life, the circle where the day returned each ferning, folding families into its warmth. In the world before switches and stoves, the fire was never sudden and never taken for granted. It needed tending, coaxing, and patience. A spark, drawn from flint or carried embers, had to be fed with care until it glowed into flame. And once it lived, people did not easily let it die. The hearth became the heartbeat of a house, steady and low, a pulse of light and heat that carried the home from one day to the next. In small rural cottages, the fire might burn beneath a wide stone hood, its smoke rising slowly into the night. In grander villas, it sat neatly contained within a shallow pit or clay structure, designed to hold heat furrows. No matter the size of the home, the meaning of the hearth remained the same. It was a meeting place. It was where children stretched themselves out on mats after the day's work, where mothers stirred pots of grain and beans, where fathers, weary from fields or workshops, lowered themselves onto stools, rubbing tired hands together against the fire's gentle breath. Evening brought the house together. By day, people scattered to fields, to markets, to wells, to temples, but night called them back. The hearth's flame was their guide. Imagine Thessaly, shadows lengthen outside, the sun slipping behind hills, the air turning cool. One by one, the doorway creaks, a child runs in with dusty sandals. A basket of herbs is placed down, a cloak shaken free of the day's labor. Then they settle, circling the glow, each step slower than the last, the pace of work dissolving into the calm of night. Meals were simple, yet there were moments of closeness. Bread, baked earlier in clay ovens or carried from communal bakeries, was set out. A pot of porridge or lentils simmered, thickened with bits of onion, cabbage, or a scrap of meat. When fortune allowed, the steam rose and mingled with the smoke, a smell familiar to every ancient home. People dipped pieces of bread into bowls, passed cups of water-red wine, or shared olives from small dishes. There was little grandeur, but there was rhythm. Eating was steady, unhurried, as much about company as about hunger. Stories often followed. Elders leaned closer, their face lined with years of evenings just like this, and spoke of ancestors, of small lessons, or of the land. Their voice were low, almost like the crackle of the fire itself. Children listened with wide eyes until their lids grew heavy. Sometimes the stories were of gods and heroes, but often they were of weather, of planting seasons, of a relative remembered with affection. The hearth gave a stage for memory, its light making even ordinary tales seem timorous. Silence, too, was part of these gatherings. Families could sit together without needing to speak. The quiet, filled with the pop of wood, the faint whistle of a pot, the rustle of wind through shutters. In that silence was a kind of unity. People were not isolated in their thoughts, but joined by the presence of flame and kin. To fall asleep beside the hearth was to feel secure, as though the house itself was watching over you with steady eyes of fire. In the countryside, many families kept their hearth fires alive through the night. Before sleeping, the flames were banked with ash, lowered into a bed of glowing embers that would smolder softly until dawn. In Themening, these embers were coaxed back into flame, saving the trouble of striking sparks anew. The practice was, but it was also symbolic. The fire bridged the gap between yesterday and today, carrying the spirit of the household across time. If ever the fire did go out, some households would borrow a flame from a neighbor, walking home with a carefully shielded torch, as if carrying a piece of their neighbor's heart back to their own. In towns, the hearth also acted as a kind of clock. The length of time a log burned marked the evening's passing. A child sent to fetch another stick of wood could sense the steady rhythm of night. First, the first log, then another, until sleep called. Without bells or watches, the fire gave structure. It dimmed gradually, signaling when the household should wind down, when conversation should fade, when the world beyond the doorway had gone completely still. There was comfort, too, in knowing that across the city other fires glowed. Lamps shone in courtyards, but inside homes, hearths burned quietly, unseen but felt. They were part of a shared pattern. Just as stars filled the sky, hearth fires dotted the earth. To sit beside your own was to belong to something larger, to Thegrit web of people settling down, across villages and hills, under the same night, and yet each fire was personal. Families arranged their evenings according to its light. One house might sit close, knees nearly touching, laughter soft and private. Another might stretch out, space enough for tools drying by the wall. Near the corner, a dog curled beside the warmth. Each hearth was a portrait of its household, painted not in colors but in glow. Religious meaning lingered there as well. In Rome, the goddess Vesta watched over hearthfires. Her flame kept alive in temples as a mirror of the ones in every home. People offered small prayers before fire, sometimes dropping bits of food or wine into the flames, letting smoke carry their wishes upward. Ingress Hestia was honored, her spirit said to dwell in every hearth. Lighting the evening fire could thus feel like a ritual, not just a task. The flame connected the human to the divine, the household to eternity. The hearthworm softened even hard days. A farmer who returned from hours bent over fields could find peace in its glow. A mother burdened with chores could let her shoulders ease as she stirred a pot. A child scolded earlier in the day could sit near the fire and feel forgiven. The warmth, melting tension. It was a place where the sharpness of Thule dulled, where people remembered they belonged. Over time, the hearth became memory itself. Many adults, looking back on childhood, recalled most vividly the evenings by the fire, the faces lit in soft light, thesmal of smoke in clothes, the sensation of drifting into sleep while embers glowed faintly behind closed eyes. The hearth marked not only nights but entire lives, each flame a thread in the fabric of family history. Even as lamps and torches lit streets and temples, the hearth remained the truest light of home. It did not seek to shine outward, but inward. Its glow was not to impress or guide strangers, but to gather and hold those who belonged. God was a steady companion, the quiet proof that no one was truly alone while the fire lived. As the night deepened, families gradually slipped into rest. Pots were set aside, cups emptied, wood shifted one last time. Children dozed against their parents, carried to bed with soot on their cheeks. Elders leaned back, eyes half closed, watching the coals with the patience of years. Finally, silence grew complete. The fire banked low, pulsed gently. Outside the world was dark, but inside, the hearth still whispered warmth. This was the rhythm repeated across centuries. In every land where fire was tamed, it became the same. A circle of warmth, of food, of company, of memory. The hearth's glow was steady, reassuring, and unpretentious. It did not shout, but it tendered, night after night, through storms, through winters, through lives that came and went. To imagine those evenings is to understand the deep bond between people and flame. Fire was not only survival, it was belonging. It was the center that drew lives together, weaving them into the same quiet pattern, and in that flickering glow, humanity found not just warmth, but peace. Clay, it was the most ordinary of substances, pulled from riverbeds, pressed between palms, and shaped with water. Yet from clay came vessels that carried food, jars that held water, and, perhaps most tenderly, lamps that held the night at bay. These were not grand objects, not the kind of things kings boasted of or sentimentalized. They were small, practical, and quiet. A clay lamp was often no larger than the hand that made it. Some were round and open, little more than shallow dishes, where oil pooled and a wick floated. Others had spouts pinched from the rim, narrowing to guide the flame. Over centuries, their designs shifted, but their purpose remained constant: to create a little island of light in the sea of darkness. A potter at his wheel would know the weight and balance needed. A lamp too shallow spilled its oil too quickly. A lamp too deep suffocated flame. With a press of thumb and careful smoothing, the potter created a shape meant to cradle not just full but the hours of human life that unfolded in its glow. Some lamps bore decoration, a stamped rosette, a simple line, a swirl pressed into wet clay. Others remained plain, their beauty found in function. Once fired, they hardened into objects that could last years, sometimes generations, before crumbling back to earth. Stone lamps carried a different weight. They were carved rather than shaped, drawn from limestone or steatite, hollowed with patience by chisels. Smooth to the touch, they could be cool even when the flame burned within them. Stone did not shatter with heat, and its pores did not drink the oil as clay sometimes did. Families who owned stone lamps often passed them down, their edges blackened with soot, that no washing could erase. Archaeologists uncovered them today in caves, in temples, in ruined homes, their surfaces marked by fire's long kiss. Each one is a fossil of illumination, a frozen memory of nights lived long ago. When archaeologists lift such lamps from the soil, they hold in their hands not only an object, but an echo. The lamp once sat on a low table, or on a niche covered a wall, or perhaps on the floor itself. It glowed while someone stitched cloth, whispered a prayer, or shared bread with a neighbor. The smoke stains on the rim are not just damage, they are the physical record of flame breathing, flickering, and consuming oil drop by drop. What survives in museums today is not just pottery. Austernet is the residue of life lived by firelight. In temples, lamps took on heightened meaning. 1,000 clay lamps, each small and fragile, could together create a blaze of devotion. Set before altars, their flames trembled like worshippers themselves, bowing in silent rhythm. The act of lighting a lamp became prayer. It was not enough to speak words to the divine. One offered flame, a fragile yet persistent gesture of presence. Even ingrown sanctuaries of marble and gold, the lamps were humble. Clay, stone, and oil, three simple materials carried upward by human hope. In homes, their meaning was gentler. A lamp might sit on a shelf while a mother nursed her child. Another might glow faintly beside a door, guiding a father home after a late return. Children learned early how to tend a wick, how to pour oil carefully so as not to drown the flame, how to trim the cherubim so the light burned clean. Were not complex tasks, but they were responsibilities. A dropped lamp could cause fire. A forgotten lamp could burn out too soon. Each small act of tending reinforced the awareness that light was precious, fragile, and worth care. The fuels varied. Olive oil, thick and fragrant, was prized in Mediterranean lands, its slow burn offering a steady glow. Elsewhere, sesame oil, animal fat, or even melted butter served. Whatever the fuel, the principle remained. A vessel held liquid, a wick drew it upward, and the flame transformed it into light. Such simplicity belied its power. The lamp extended waking hours, softened loneliness, and gave shape to darkness. It turned a cave into a home, a temple into a beacon, and a night into a time, not of fear but of thought. To sit by a clay lamp was to live with a particular rhythm. The flame was never still. It bent and leaned with the faintest breeze. It flared when oil was plentiful. It guttered when near exhaustion. People learned to read these signs. A high, strong flame meant hours remained. A trembling, weak glow warned off fuel running low. In this way, lamps became timekeepers as well as illuminators. Before mechanical clocks, before glowing screens, the pace of the night was measured in the rise and fall of fire. Lamps also traveled. Soldiers on campaign carried small ones in their packs, a comfort against the emptiness of foreign nights. Merchants kept them in stalls, burning through late trade. Pilgrims lit them at shrines along the road, leaving behind a trace of their passage. In each case, the lamp was portable hope. Its clay might chip, its oil might spill, yet as long as the flame survived, it created a circle of familiarity in the midst of strangeness. Consider to the artistry hidden in the ordinary. Some lamps bore designs of fish, birds, or vines. Others were molded with human faces, so that the flame seemed to glow from within a carved expression. These were not necessary embellishments, yet they reveal a truth. Even in the simplest tools, people sought beauty. A lamp was not only utility, but a companion, and companions deserved adornment. When archaeologists unearth such lamps today, they are often struck by the individuality of each piece, as if no two nights of the ancient world ever glowed in exactly the same way. Over centuries, styles shifted. In one era, wide-open lamps dominated, their flames exploded. In another, closed lamps with covered tops and small nozzles for wicks became popular, controlling the burn and reducing smoke. Each shift reflects changing needs: less smoke for indoor spaces, steadier flames for longer hours, portability for travel. Yet despite these variations, the essence remained: clay, stone, oil, wick, and flame. A technology that never sought grandeur, but endured precisely because it was simple, reliable, and human. The survival of these lamps into our museums and collections is almost miraculous. Clay as fragile stone can break, yet thousands survive, each one whispering of countless evenings. When we look at them behind glass, We often focus on form, date, style, but if we listen more quietly, we might sense some thingles, the human longing they answered. For all their simplicity, these lamps were shields against the void, affirmations that light could be called forth even when the sky went black. There is a humility in realizing that some of the greatest changes in human comfort came not from monumental inventions but from these small vessels. They did not conquer lands or raise empires, but they changed how nights felt. They extended the space of life. They allowed songs to be sung longer, prayers to be whispered later, conversations to deepen, and silences to stretch in peace rather than fear. Each lamp was a bridge between day and night, between solitude and presence, between the fragile human figure and the vast, indifferent dark. Even when broken, lamps tell their story. Archaeologists often find fragments half a spout, a shard, with a pattern, a base charred black. These fragments, too, are witnesses. They testify that countless generations lived by flame, relied on its glow, and measured their nights in its rhythm. The brokenness does not erase the story. It completes it, reminding us that these objects were used, touched, and lived with until they crumbled. To think of them now is to feel a certain quick gratitude. We, too, seek light in our nights, though ours comes with switches, bulbs, and an unthinking flood of brilliance. Yet the principle is unchanged. The human heart still leans toward flame, still finds comforting glow. Clay and stone lamps remind us that our ancestors solved the problem of darkness, not with overwhelming power but with gentle persistence. They shaped a little vessel, poured in oil, touched a wick with fire, and found enough light to live by. And so, these lamps endure not just in museums, but in memory, in imagination, in the quiet recognition that sometimes the smallest tools carry the greatest weight. They airy inches against the vastness of night, steady companions to lives long past, and to us, they remain symbols, oft fragile, yet enduring triumph of light over dark. Before the bright certainty of electricity, before the effortless press of a switch, light was coaxed into being framed, most ordinary of materials. It did not arrive with the power of thunderbolts or the roar of storms, but through wire pressed, from fruit, fat rendered from beasts, and fibers twisted by human hands. The lamp was humble, but its ingredients were humbler still, drawn from fields, herds, and waters. And it was this quiet combination of elements that gave the world its evenings. To live in those times was to know these materials intimately, to touch them, smell them, store them, and pass down the knowledge of their use as carefully as any other household craft. Oil, fat, and wick, three things so small they might go unnoticed by history's grand narratives, yet together they shaped the rhythm of human nights. Olive oil was the gentlest of fuels, prized where olive trees grew in patient rows across Mediterranean hillsides. Families gathered the fruit, pressed it with stone weights, and watched the golden liquid flow, shimmering as though it carried sunlight within itself. Some oil went to food, some to ritual, some to trade, but always a portion was set aside for lamps. Olive oil burned clean, with a steady flame and a sweetness in its scent that filled the home with familiarity. In a world where the night was heavy and full of shadows, olive oil carried a comfort that was almost affectionate, as though the trees themselves were sharing their stored light. To tend a lamp of olive oil was to cradle a portion of the summer sun, extended into the darker months. Yet not every land bore olive trees. In colder or wetter regions, where Grover could not thrive, people turned to animal fat, tallow from cattle or sheep, lard from pigs, even rendered fat from wild animals. All became the fuel that filled clay vessels. The process was laborious. Fat had to be melted, strained, purified, and cooled. Its smell was heavier, its burn smokier, and its handling less pleasant than oil. Still, it gave light, and that was what mattered most. For those who lived where olives were foreign luxuries, fat lamps were companions just as surely as oil lamps were in the south. Their glow was often dimmer, their smoke thicker, but they carried the essential promise. The darkness would not have the final word. By the sea, fish oil joined the list. Whale oil, when later centuries brought whaling, became a valued commodity, burning longer and brighter than many other fuels. But even before the age of great hunts, fishermen's households knew the of fish oil lamps. The smell was sharp, unmistakable, and often clung to clothing and walls. Yet it filled a need. When the sky darkened over harbors and huts, when nets were mended and sails patched by hand, fish oil lamps glowed patiently. Their scent may have spoken of sea and salt, but their flame was no different from any other. Fragile, bright, alive. Fuel alone, however, could do nothing without the wick. The wick was the hidden messenger between substance and flame. Twisted from flax, cotton, papyrus, or any fibrous material at hand, it was the wick that drew oil upward, thread by thread, drop by drop. The lamp's secret lay in this capillary miracle. Liquid climbed upward, defying its nature, to feed the hunger of fire. To prepare a wick was to practice Askal, that blended knowledge with intuition. Too thick, and the flame smoked. Too thin, and it sputtered out. Too tightly twisted, and the oil could not climb. Too loose, and the flame devoured it too quickly. Families knew these. Mothers taught daughters, fathers guided sons, and children learned by watching the small motions of trimming, twisting, and setting a wick into place. Every evening carried its own small ritual. A lamp was lifted, its empty belly inspected. Oil, or fat, was poured, sometimes from a small jug reserved for this purpose. The wickwise lowered carefully, its end resting just where flame could touch it. A spark was brought near flint again, steel, or ember from another firehand. Suddenly, with a tremor of orange and a thin coil of smoke, the night softened. In that moment, a household claimed its circle of light. What had been uncertain darkness became a place of belonging. The glow reached across faces, across bowls of food, across tools set aside after labor. It was not only the lamp that was lit, it was the space itself, the home, the heart. The smell of lamps marked the horses surely as any bell. Olive oil lent its sweetness, faintly fruity, almost edible. Animal fat carried a heavier tang, sometimes bitter, sometimes comforting in its earthiness. Fish oil declared itself sharply, a scent no visitor could miss. Each region, each household, each family carried its own olfactory signature of light, so that to step into a neighbor's dwelling was to enter a new fragrance of evening. These scents were not considered strange or profane. They were simply the natural companions of night, as much a part of the household as the creak of timbers or the hiss of boiling pots. To tend a lamp was a skill of patience. Wicks charred as they burned, blackening at their tips. A careful hand trimmed them with a knife or pinched them between damp fingers, keeping the flame steady and smoke minimal. Oil had to be added before it ran dry, or else the wick would burn down too far, wasting fiber. The vessel itself needed cleaning, for soot clung stubbornly to the edges, staining clay or stone. These tasks, simple though they were, demanded attention. A neglected lamp could tip, spill, or ignite nearby straw. A forgotten lamp could vanish into darkness at an unwelcome hour. Thus, the tending of lamps became part of daily rhythm, woven into chores as naturally as fetching water or kneading bread. This knowledge passed quietly, without written instruction. Children learned by doing, by watching elders, by imitating the careful hands that poured oil, cut wicks, or adjusted flame. No one called it education, yet it was among the most practical forms of learning. The continuity was unbroken. One generation after another knew how to coax light from simple matter. If olive harvests failed, fat would serve. If flax was scarce, another fiber will do. Flexibility was built into the practice, but the essence never changed. Light was born from fuel, wick, and care, and those who knew how to tend it carried forward. One of humanity's oldest inheritances. Beyond homes, lamps lit workshops, where artisans carved, stitched, or hammered by night. In monasteries, monks leaned over manuscripts, their eyes straining by lamplight to copy words across parchment. In ships at sea, small lamps swung on hooks, their flames swaying with the motion of the waves, guiding sailors through charts and prayers. In all these places, the same substances sustained the glow. Oil, fat, and wick transformed into time, into work, into devotion. The lamp's materials also shaped economy. Olive oil was a commodity, traded in jar sacras, roads and seas, carried on donkeyback or shipboard. Whale oil later built empires of commerce, its light reaching cities far from the oceans where it was hunted. Animal fat tied rural households to herds, every slaughter yielding not just food but future nights of brightness. Fibers for wicks came from fields of flax, cotton, or hemp, linking illumination to agriculture itself. Light, then, was never abstract. It was the direct outcome of landscapes, harvests, hunts, and labors. To understand the glow in a household was to understand the world outside it. The vulnerability of lamps was also ever present. Oil spilled easily, staining cloth, soaking into wood, igniting when touched by spark. Tallow hardened in cold weather, refusing to pour until warmed. Wicks burn out too quickly or not at all. Each evening carried not only reassurance but also risk. Families knew caution, placing lamps on firm surfaces, shielding them from drafts, keeping children from careless play. The flame's gift was by its danger, and this awareness shaped behavior. Light was precious, but it was also fragile, and it commanded respect. Over centuries, innovations refined these materials, but never replaced them entirely. Spouts were reshaped to control wick length. Covered tops reduced evaporation. Special blends of oil improved burning, yet the core remained unchanged. A vessel, a fuel, a wick, a flame. Even when grander systems of lighting arose, torches in public spaces, candelabras in wealthy halls, the humble lamp remained the common companion of ordinary lives. And so, when we think of nights long past, it is not only the stars above or the moon's glow that we should imagine. It is the small, flickering lights of oil, fat, and wick, scattered in homes, temples, ships, and markets. Each one was a fragile defiance of darkness, born from the simplest things, tended by patient hands, and remembered in the soot that still clings to their ancient remains. To speak of histories' empires is to speak of kings and battles, but to speak of history's evenings is to speak of lamps of oil precitrum, olives, fat rendered from beasts, wicks twisted by hand, and the small flames that turned night into something livable. This was the inheritance of countless generations, not conquest, not invention, but the quietude of tending fire in a vessel. And though we live now in a blaze of electric certainty, the memory remains. Vestal light candles in ceremony, still trim wicks in lanterns, still cherish the sight of flame. It is the echo of Thassa, who once lived by oil, fat, and wick, their evenings softened by the glow of humble light. When the sun withdrew from the horizon and shadows began to stretch across the land, the streets of ancient towns transformed. They did not fall into the thick, impenetrable blackness that modern imagination often paints, nor did they blaze with the ceaseless light of our contemporary cities. Instead, they settled into something softer, a half-lit world of patches and pockets, of glow and shadow, where movement slowed and sounds became sharper. Ancient streets after sunset were places of both quiet labor and subtle social life, framed not by silence but by subdued presence. The interplay of faint light and careful footsteps created an atmosphere at once familiar and mysterious, tender and watchful. Doorways were the first to glow. Families who could spare a little oil placed small lamps at their thresholds, letting their flicker mark the division between home and world. These flames were practical, guiding returning members or visitors through winding alleys, but they were also symbolic. A lit doorway was a sign of welcome, a gesture that said, "Here is warmth, here is safety, here is life continuing into the night." Those lamps spilled their faint halos onto uneven stones, illuminating only enough to see a step ahead. Yet in that meager radius, a sense of belonging took shape. To walk past such a light was to know that the street was not abandoned, that human presence lingered even as darkness deepened. Shops and taverns added to this scattered constellation. The sound of laughter, the murmur of trade, or the smell of food and drink announced them before the eye caught their glow. A tavern's lantern, swinging gently above its door, was less an advertisement than an assurance, an invitation to pause, to share company, to sit within a circle of brightness that pushed back the vastness of night. Inns and alehouses became gathering spots, not only because of their drink or shelter, but because they extended the day. Where work ended with the setting sun, taverns kept fueled awake a little longer, their lamplight visible down narrow lanes. Like stars in miniature, travelers themselves carried small flames, a rushlight, a candle shielded in a lantern, or a simple torch guided footsteps over uneven cobblestones. These moving points of light turned streets into shifting tapestries of motion, where a glow might appear around a corner, approach with measured pace, and then fade into distance once more. To Sisak, a light approaching was to wonder who carried it: a merchant returning late from market, a soldier making his rounds, or a family hurrying homeward after some festivity. Each flame became not just illumination, but identity, the bearer's presence announced long before their face was visible. And so the streets were never entirely dark. They were stitched together by these scattered flames, each one a fragment of human persistence against night. Yet neither were they fully bright. Darkness pooled in corners, lay heavy beneath overhangs, and stretched endlessly in the space between. Lamps. It was this combination light, sufficient to guide, darkness to humble, that gave ancient night streets their character. The world was not erased by darkness, nor conquered by light, but balanced in a delicate, shifting harmony. Walking such streets was an act of attention, the ear sharpened, learning to hear sandals scraping stone, dogs padding softly, the faint clatter of a distant cart, voices carried further than in the day, murmurs amplified by silence, so that even low conversations reached curious ears, a laugh at a tavern door, the cry of a vendor selling late-baked bread, or the gentle song of a passerby became part of the night's fabric. These were not streets of noise and bustle. They were streets of small sounds, each one distinct against the hush for many. Night was not a time of fear, but of gentleness. The day's labor receded, and the pace slowed. Families strolled together after meals, neighbors visited, storytellers and musicians sometimes appeared in squares, their art framed by circles of lamplight. Lovers walked quietly, using the partial darkness as a cloak for privacy. Children played shadowed games, darting in and out of pools of light. Even those who moved for necessity, for work, for travel, for trade, did so with a rhythm more measured than in daylight. The night taught caution, but it also taught care. Still, not every street was welcoming. In wealthier districts, lamps might be more frequent, funded by communal effort or maintained by guards. But in poorer quarters, light was scarce, and the darkness pressed more heavily. Here, footsteps slowed even more, and people stayed close to familiar routes. Dogs guarded thresholds more fiercely, and watchful eyes peered from small windows. Night was never lawless, but it demanded awareness. Travelers chose paths not only for speed but for speedy, remembering which alleys were friendly and which best avoided after dusk. Thus, the geography of Thessaly shifted with the setting sun. What was open and bustling by day narrowed into careful channels of movement at night. The stone itself carried the night's character. Walls glistened faintly where lamplight caught them, their surfaces shifting between rough shadow and smooth gleam. Windows became black squares, revealing little except the faint flicker of fire within. Streets bent and twisted, some narrowing so much that two passers-by carrying lanterns had to tilt them carefully to avoid brushing flames. Rain made everything shine more brightly, multiplying each lamp into trembling reflections on wet cobbles, so that the city seemed richer in light than it really was. Dust, by contrast, softened the glow, turning each flame into a hazy blur. The texture of the street determined the quality of night itself. Animals played their part as well. Cats prowled, their eyes glinting when they crossed a lamplight. Horses, tethered outside taverns, shifted and stamped, their breath steaming in the cooler air. Dogs barked at passing strangers, their voices echoing against stone walls. The rhythms of human and animal intertwined, so that no street was ever wholly still. Movement and sound pulsed gently, never overwhelming, always reminding those who walked that the city remained alive, even if drowsier than in Thessaly. Some cities developed modest systems of organized nightlight. In parts of Rome, lamps were hung at intersections, provided by the wealthy as acts of generosity or civic pride. In certain medieval towns, citizens were required to hang lanterns outside their doors on specified nights, ensuring at least a thread of illumination for patrols. Yet these systems were fragile, dependent on the discipline of households or the generosity of. Most of the time, light remained private, personal, and fragmentary, with each household contributing or withholding its flame according to means and choice. Night was communal only in the way each individual acted, and so the streets varied greatly from block to block. The watchmen, too, shaped the mood of the night. Carrying lanterns or torches, they paced slowly through their appointed areas, their footsteps steady, their presence both protective and symbolic. The light they bore was not merely for their own guidance. It was a beacon of order, reassuring those who saw it that the city was watched. At the same time, the watch's glow carried authority, reminding loiterers and wanderers that not every corner was free of scrutiny. To encounter their flame in the distance was to feel a mixture of reassurance and restraint, comfort that someone guarded the threats, but also awareness that the night was not wholly one's own. Festivals transformed the streets utterly. On holy days or civic celebrations, lanterns multiplied, strung across squares, hung from doorways, carried in processions. Music and voices filled the air, and the night became as bright as the day had ever been, though in a softer, warmer way. These occasions revealed the full potential of flame, not just to push back darkness, but to create joy, to invite community, to mark the extraordinary within the ordinary. The same streets that on most nights glowed only faintly suddenly blazed with abundance, showing how fragile the boundary was between hushed routine and jubilant celebration. And yet, the ordinary nights were just as important. They were the background of lives, the daily rhythm that people trusted. Streets after sunset were not stages for grand events, but canvases for human persistence. They carried workers home, bore children to bed, held lovers in quick embrace, echoed with footsteps of watchmen, dogs, merchants, and wanderers. Each flame, each shadow, each murmur of voice belonged to this tapestry of ordinary night. The streets were not frightening. They were human. Their hush was not silence but presence. Their darkness was not emptiness but balance. Today, when we step into cities ablaze with electric brightness, it is easy to forget how carefully people once lived with night. Yet in imagining those streets patched with flame, softened with quiet, guided by careful steps, we see the night was not conquered, it was accompanied. Lamps and lanterns did not erase the dark, but conversed with it, shaping a world of gentleness rather than dominance. Ancient streets after sunset remind us that illumination need not overwhelm, that life can continue in balance, that sometimes, in the hush of scattered flames, a deeper kind of presence is found. The sacred spaces of the ancient world carried a glow unlike that of any home or street. When the sun had set and darkness spread across villages and cities, the temple flame continued to burn, unwavering, steady, as though it belonged not to the rhythms of day and night, but to eternity itself. Priests tended these fires with devotion, ensuring that the light never faltered, never diminished into smoke and ash. To let the flame die was not simple negligence, it was sacrilege, a rupture of the delicate thread that bound mortals to their gods. In the presence of these flames, time seemed to pause, and those who entered the halls felt themselves drawn into a deeper stillness, one in which the ordinary bustle of the world fell away. Here, the light was not utilitarian, but transcendent, not a tool for seeing but a vessel for believing. The architecture of temples was designed to frame this light. Vast columns, stone walls, and towering doorways led worshippers inward, toward spaces where daylight diminished, replaced by the glow of lamps and braziers. The further one walked, the dimmer the natural light became, until at last only the sacred flame remained, flickering yet eternal. In Egypt, sanctuaries within great temples like Karnak or Luxor were deliberately windowless, their darkness broken only by oil lamps set before statues of the gods. In Greece, the hearth flame of Hestia burned at the heart of both city and temple, symbolizing unity and divine. In Rome, the Vestal virgins tended the sacred fire of Vesta, their duty a living embodiment of civic continuity. Across cultures, the flame was not decoration, it was essence. It transformed stone into sanctuary, space into presence. The act of tending the flame carried profound meaning. A priest lifting oil to a lamp, or adding kindling to a brazier, was not merely performing maintenance but enacting devotion. Each gesture was ritualized, performed in silence or accompanied by chant. Oil poured slowly, carefully, as though time itself demanded patience. Wick trimmed gently, so the flame could breathe and endure. These motions were watched, remembered, repeated for generations, becoming part of the identity of the temple. A visitor who entered at dawn or midnight would always see the same glow, carried forward across seasons, rulers, and lifetimes. In the rhythm of that constancy, people felt reassurance. The gods, like the flame, endured. The worshipper's experience was shaped by the interplay of shadow and light. Entering a temple at night, or in the dim hours of early morning, was to enter another world. Footsteps echoed softly, reminding each pilgrim of their own presence within sacred space. Walls, carved with symbols or inscriptions, were half hidden, in darkness, revealed only where light touched them. The divine statue, often gilded or painted, caught the lamp's glow in subtle ways, and I see metal shine, a hand glimmered, a crown sparkled. This play of light transformed stone into presence, making the godnet only seen but felt. In such moments, flame became more than fire. It was revelation, the bridge that made the invisible world perceptible to mortal eyes. The smoke, too, carried significance. As oil or incense burned, tendrils rose upward, twisting slowly, vanishing into air. To the worshippers, these were not random movements of combustion, but the visible ascent of prayer, the physical sign that words spoken in silence had found their path to the heavens. The flame gave form to yearning, and the smoke gave it flight. Together they transformed medicinal devotion into a shared spectacle, visible to all who gathered. To kneel before a sacred flame was to join countless others across time, each pair of eyes reflecting the same glow, each heart beating with the same reverent rhythm. Temples preserved not only light, but memory. Eternal flames often marked continuity. In Rome, as long as the flame of Vesta burned, the city itself was believed to endure. Should it felt a disaster was feared to follow famine, invasion, or divine abandonment. The Vestal virgins, chosen children and bound by sacred duty, lives entirely devoted to the preservation of that fire. Their daily labor was quiet but immense, a living testament that civilization rested on the care of a simple, unbroken flame. In Greece, sacred fires bound communities. Colonists setting forth to found a new city would carry with them a flame from their mother city's hearth, ensuring that the divine presence was not left behind but transplanted to seas. These acts reveal how deeply fire was tied to identity, how much a community's sense of existency upon its continuity. Different cultures gave the sacred flame different tones. In Egypt, lamps lit corridors, their glow soft against carved walls filled with hieroglyphs. Priests bathed, purified, and dressed before approaching the flame, their entire body prepared as vessels of respect. In India, the lamp or deepa became part of daily puja, a ritual not of maintaining eternity but of offering devotion anew each day. Worshippers circled the flame before deities, waving it as both gift and illumination, then carried its warmth back to themselves by touching their foreheads. In Zoroastrian temples, fire itself was the central icon, not hidden or secondary, but placed prominently upon the altar. Here, the flame was no mere symbol, it was the very presence of Ahura Mazda, divine truth manifested in fire's purity. These variations reveal the universality of the sacred flame, and yet its ability to adapt, embodying distinct theological visions while retaining the same elemental mystery. Silence was part of the temple atmosphere, though it was not the silence of emptiness but of concentration. A visitor entering the flame-lit hall might hear the shuffle of robes, the murmur of prayers, the occasional crackle of wick and oil. These small sounds deepened the sense of presence. Unlike the marketplace, where every sound competed for attention, the temple's quietness allowed each detail to resonate. The flame itself seemed to speak, its flicker drawing eyes, its warmth steadying bodies. To sit in such a hall for even a few moments was to feel one's own heartbeat align with the rhythm of the flame. People often left temples, not with answers, but with calm, their burdens lighter simply because they had shared space with a light that never wavered. Festivals magnified the role of sacred flames. Lamps multiplied, carried in processions, floated on rivers, set in long rows upon temple steps. Nights of devotion transformed into nights of brilliance, where darkness was not banished but reshaped into backdrop for radiance. Pilgrims traveled miles to witness these moments, believing that to see the sacred flame was itself a blessing. In such celebrations, individual devotion became communal spectacle, uniting thousands of eyes upon the same glow. Each flame carried personal prayers, but together they became a sea of light, vast and humbling. These were nights when mortals felt closer to the divine, when the boundary between earth and heaven seemed thinnest, illuminated by countless flickering bridges. Sacred flames also carried weight in myths and stories. Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, ensured that mortals would always carry a divine spark. The fire at Delphi, near the oracle of Apollo, was tended as carefully as the words of prophecy. In Hindu mythology, Agni, the fire god, was both mist and presence, consuming offerings and delivering them to the divine realm. These stories reinforced belief that fire was not passive but alive, a being in itself, capable of anger, compassion, or wisdom. When worshippers gazed at the flame, they were not staring at a thing, but entering relationship with a living entity. What makes the sacred flame so enduring is its duality. It is both fragile and eternal, vulnerable to wind and yet bearer of immortality. A careless hand can extinguish it, and yet its light is spoken of as unending. This tension mirrors the human condition, mortality yearning toward eternity, weakness aspiring to strength. To tend the flame is to acknowledge fragility, to admit that even divinity depends upon human devotion to endure in the world. And yet, once lit, the flame seems to surpass all human effort, glowing with a constancy that feels greater than the one who tends it. In this balance, people found both humility and hope. Even today, echoes of these practices remain. Candles lit in cathedrals, lamps burning in shrines, eternal flames at memorials, all continue the ancient language of light. We still kneel before flickers of fire, still believe that a flame can carry grief, gratitude, or prayer. We light candles for the departed, hoping that their journey is eased. We kindle lamps at weddings, believing that love will endure. We preserve flames at national monuments, linking civic identity to. These are modern inheritances of ancient truths, that light is more than light, that flame speaks to something within us beyond sight. In the end, temples and their sacred flames remind us that the human story is inseparable from fire. To eat, we needed it. To travel, we carried it. To worship, we preserved it. The flame was warmth, but also meaning. It taught us that within every flicker there lies a mystery, a light that consumes and yet gives life. A fire that is fragile yet eternal, a glow that belongs equally to body and soul. In its presence, ancient worshippers found the courage to believe that they were never alone, that between themselves and Thevist, unknown, stretched a bridge of flame, steady, flickering, always waiting to guide them into the quiet presence of the divine. When the sun descended and shadows stretched across rooftops, villages and cities of the pre-modern world did not sink immediately into silence. Instead, another kind of life emerged, one less bound by labor and more attuned to pleasure, conversation, and community. After a day of toil in the fields, workshops, or streets, people sought spaces where they might exchange not only goods, but also words, stories, and warmth. The tavern and the evening market were two such places, their glow of oil lamps offering both practical vision and a promise of companionship. In their flickering light, the human desire for connection and sustenance found expression. The tavern was perhaps the most emblematic of these spaces. Wooden tables bore marks of years of use, scratches from knives, rings left by cups, stains from spilled wine. Lamps placed upon these tables gave off a modest radiance, insufficient to brighten the whole room, but enough to illuminate a circle of faces. The glow seemed to encourage intimacy, gathering people closer, drawing them into clusters where words could be exchanged more readily than in the open daylight. The laughter that filled these rooms was not booming but warm, shaped by the smallness of the space and the modesty of the light. To drink and eat under such conditions was to share not only food and drink, but also a sense of belonging. The tavern keeper stood at the center of this world, often both host and storyteller. He, or sometimes she, knew the rhythms of the neighborhood and the temperaments of regular patrons. A careful keeper adjusted the lamp wicks, trimmed them when smoke thickened, and poured fresh oil when the flame guttered low. The tending of light became part of the tending of guests. Without it, the room would sink into shadow. With it, laughter continued, conversations lingered, and the sense of fellowship endured. Taverns relied not on grandeur, but on consistency. Patrons trusted that when they pushed open the creaking door at night, they would find a room alive with glow, scent, and sound. Food and drink, though simple, took on richness in this context. Bread, cheese, salted fish, or stews simmered through the day tasted better when shared with others beneath the glow of lamps. Wine reflected the flicker of flames, making even a rough cup feel precious. The dimness concealed imperfections and elevated the sensory experience. Flavors seemed deeper, aromas more pronounced, laughter more resonant. People often remembered not the exact meal they had consumed, but the glow of the room, the warmth of voices, the comfort of being enveloped in a light that promised refuge from the cold and the dark beyond the door. Taverns were also places of storytelling. Travelers, soldiers returning from campaigns, merchants just in from the road all carried tales that could be traded for a cup of drink or simply offered to hold the attention of an eager crowd. In the lamplight, these stories took on new life. Faces leaned closer, shadows danced on walls, gestures were magnified by the flicker of flames. A heroic deed seemed more heroic, a distant land more exotic, a danger more perilous when described in the shifting glow of fire. Light did not merely reveal it, dramatized, turning words into shared visions. Yet taverns were not only for joy. They could be spaces of argument, negotiation, or even conspiracy. The low light offered a kind of privacy, blurring details and allowing voices to blend into a collective murmur. Disputes over trade, political whispers, or secret alliances often found their start here. The lamps bore witness to both camaraderie and conflict, casting the same glow over laughter and over tense stares. In this way, the tavern was a microcosm of community life, where human nature revealed itself in all its variety, softened yet sharpened by the presence of light. Beyond taverns, the evening markets formed another theater of nocturnal life. Stalls lined narrow streets or clustered in squares, each lit by oil lamps perched precariously on wooden posts or hanging from cords. These lamps cast uneven patches of brightness, illuminating baskets of fruit, loaves of bread, heaps of fish, and bolts of cloth. The market did not rival the daylight, but it stretched the day just enough to allow commerce and conviviality to continue. The flicker of lamps drew buyers as surely as the scent of baked bread or the call of vendors. The evening market was a place of mingling. Farmers brought what remained from the day's harvest. Fishermen laid out their catches, and artisans displayed wares that glowed faintly in the dim light. Shoppers moved slowly, inspecting goods with careful eyes, holding produce up toward the lamps to see its color more clearly. Every sale, every barter, was accompanied by conversation, a question, a jest, a mild protest at price. The market's hum was a gentle chorus, stitched together by the glow of many small flames. Here, light was not luxury, but necessity, enabling transactions that might otherwise have been left undone. The atmosphere of the evening market was distinct from that of the tavern. Where taverns enclosed people in intimacy, markets expanded their sense of community. Families strolled, neighbors greeted one another, children darted between stalls, drawn as much by the spectacle of flame as by the goods on offer. The uneven glow made shadows long and mysterious, turning even ordinary wares into curiosities. Apples shone as though more red, fish scales caught glimmers of light. Bolts of fabric revealed colors that daylight might not emphasize. The market was not merely about sustenance, it was also about wonder. The small enchantments created by light upon surface. These spaces, tavern and market, were bound together by their use of flame, but differed in mood. The tavern was inward, protective, almost secretive, while the market was outward, open, public. Both, however, depended on the same principle, that light could stretch the boundaries of the day. Without lamps, night would have silenced commerce and conversation. With them, evening became a liminal space, neither fully day nor fully night, in which human connection continued to thrive. The significance of these places lay not only in what was consumed or purchased, but in what was shared. To sit at a table or to pause before a stall was to acknowledge the value of community. A solitary meal at home filled the stomach, but a meal at the tavern filled both body and spirit. A purchase by day satisfied need, but a purchase at night became an event, remembered for the voices, scents, and glows that accompanied it. These experiences built the fabric of daily life, stitching together work and rest, solitude and society. We may imagine a typical evening. A villager, having finished labor in the fields, enters the market to purchase bread. The stall is lit by a lamp, its flame bending in the breeze. The vendor offers not only the loaf but a smile, a fragment of gossip, a reminder of belonging. The villager then steps into the tavern, where familiar faces already sit, laughter rising. As cups are raised, the room glows warmly, and the villager joins in, feeling the day's toil recede. Bread is broken, stories are exchanged, and for a few hours the hardships of existence are softened by fellowship and flame. These rituals of light carried symbolic weight. The tavern lamp did not burn eternally like the temple flame, but in its modest persistence it reminded people that joy was worth tending to. The market lamp was not as grand as civic torches or festival bonfires, but it showed the tavern in the humblest spaces. Light could bring people together. In both cases, fire became a social force, shaping the rhythm of human interaction. Over centuries, these habits remained. Medieval European towns preserved bustling night markets. Ottoman cities glowed with coffee houses lit by oil lamps. Chinese towns thrived with lantern-lit stalls. Everywhere, the principle was the same: to extend community into the night. Lamps became not only tools, but symbols, tokens of continuity, warmth, and gathering. Even today, when electric bulbs have erased the boundary between day and night, the flicker of a candle on a restaurant table, or the string of lanterns at a street fair carries forward this ancient inheritance. We still crave not only light, but the mood it creates. What unites the tavern and the evening market is their quiet assertion that life is not only about labor and worship, but also about fellowship. Temples taught reverence, workshops demanded effort, but taverns and markets remind people of joy, conversation, and mutual presence. In their light, people became more than workers or worshippers. They became companions, neighbors, storytellers, and friends. The glow of these lamps was modest, but their impact was vast, shaping the texture of everyday life in ways that endure in memory and tradition. Thus, the tavern and the market stand as humble monuments to the human desire for connection. Their lamps glowed not with grandeur but with warmth, not with permanence but with persistence. They show us that even in dim spaces, laughter can flourish, trade can thrive, and community can endure. And as the last patrons left the tavern, as the last vendor closed his stall, the flames were at last extinguished. Darkness reclaimed this, but in memory, the glow lingered, a reminder that for a few hours each night, light had held back Thedork, and with it, had held together the fragile, joyful fabric of human society. The road was never a place of certainty. To walk it by day meant exposure to weather, strangers, and the unpredictable turns of distance. To walk it by night, however, meant something far more daunting: the surrender to darkness, to a world where every step might conceal hazard, where silence could signal safety or threat. Yet across centuries, people continued to move after the sun had set, and what made such journeys endurable was the humble but powerful presence of firelight. A torch in the hand, a lamp at the gate of an inn, or a campfire glowing in the open field hall. These forms of flame stood as guardians against the vastness of the void. They offered not only visibility, but reassurance, a reminder that the traveler was still part of the human world, still bound to the living network of companionship and care. In the days of the Roman Empire, travelers often relied on a chain of roadside stations known as These inns, built at regular intervals along major routes, were places where weary legs could find rest, where horses could be changed, and where messages might pass quickly from one point of the empire to another. The first sign of such a station, visible from afar on a darkened road, was often the faint glow spilling from its doors. Against the backdrop of a night sky, even the smallest flicker of oil lamps seemed like a beacon. For soldiers marching in formation, for merchants carrying goods, or for messengers bearing urgent letters, that light meant relief. It meant walls to guard against the dangers outside, food and drink to restore strength, and companionship to remind them that they were not alone in their passage. The inn itself was modest by our standards: wooden beams, clay walls, straw thatch or tiles overhead, these were the structures that sheltered travelers. Yet inside, the lamps turned such modesty into warmth. The flammer reflected off clay pots, made bread appear golden, and gave wine the sheen of a rare delight. At tables, men and women gathered to share not only meals but stories. Tales of roads traveled, of cities visited, of dangers faced, all were told beneath the same glow. For a few hours, the road became secondary. The inn became a world in itself, bound together by firelight and fellowship. For those who could not reach an inn, there was the campsite: merchants traveling in caravans, pilgrims on their way to shrines, or soldiers setting up for the night, all found safety in the circle of fire. Flames offered warmth against the cold, but more importantly, they created a boundary. The wild lay beyond, but within the reach of light there was order. People sat close, wagons drawn into a protective ring, animals tethered nearby. Sparks rose upward, joining the stars, as though fire and sky conversed in their silent languages. For travelers, such camps were both fragile and powerful. Fragile, because a strong wind or lack of fuel could end them. Powerful because their glow held back fear and loneliness. The psychology of firelight was as important as its practical function. To walk alone on a moonless night was to risk despair. The shapes of trees might appear as figures, the sound of wind as whispers, the cry of an owl as omen. But the moment a flame was lit, perception shifted. Shadows no longer threatened but framed the light. Dunknown receded, and the traveler could see not only the ground beneath his feet, but also the faces of those who shod the journey. Firelight brought people together in a way that daylight did not. Daylight encouraged separation. As travelers hurried on their paths, eager to reach their destinations, firelight encouraged gathering, as people instinctively sought the comfort of company when the world turned dark. We can imagine a merchant caravan making its way along the Silk Road. After a day of crossing dusty paths and rugged hills, the wagon fires are lit, and the good silks, spices, gems, or simple grain sacks are drawn into protective clusters. Merchants sit together, speaking in many languages, exchanging news of distant cities. Perhaps one plays a simple flute, the notes rising with the smoke. Perhaps another recounts the dangers of bandits or the wonders of our polis far away. Around them, the desert stretches, vast and indifferent. But within the circle of firelight, their espiniti, the glow transforms strangers into companions, the night into a shared experience. In medieval Europe, pilgrimages created similar scenes. Pilgrims often traveled in groups, bound together by common devotion, but also by common vulnerability. By day, they moved steadily along roads that wound through forest sandfields. By night, they lit fires beside rivers or near monasteries that offered shelter. Here prayers were murmured, songs were sung, bread was broken. The flames gave each gathering a sacred quality, reminding pilgrims that the light they carried was both physical and spiritual. To them, a fire at night was not only protection, but simply a reminder of divine presence amid uncertainty. The torch, too, held a special role in the journey of travelers. Unlike the lamp of the inn or the campfire of the caravan, the torch was mobile. It guided footsteps, marked processions, and signaled approach. A lone traveler carrying a torch on a road could be seen from afar, the flame bobbing with each step. For those awaiting him, the sight meant anticipation, the knowledge that someone was drawing near. For the traveler himself, the torch meant courage. To lift flame into the darkness was to defy the night, to declare that human will could create visibility where none was given. Torches often accompanied royal processions, weddings, funerals, and pilgrimages, but, at their heart, they remained the humble tool of those who sought to walk safely after dusk. We might also imagine the inn-yards of the Middle Ages, where travelers dismounted from horses or climbed down from wagons. Here, stable boys held torches aloft to guide the animals to their stalls. The smell of hay mixed with the scent of burning pitch. Guests weary from hours on the road were ushered toward the lights spilling from the inn door. Inside, laughter mingled with smoke, and the warmth of the hearth dispelled the chill of evening air. For these travelers, light was not an ornament. It was the very threshold between hardship and rest, between exposure and security. To pass from darkness into lamplight was to pass from uncertainty into belonging. The symbolism of firelight deepened when roads grew dangerous. In times of war, brigands and deserters haunted highways. At such moments, the faintest glow of an inn became a salvation. Even rumors of fire could mean hope. Travelers would quicken their pace, straining to reach the source before it vanished. Some did not make it, and their stories entered local lore as cautionary tales. Yet those who did arrive remembered the feeling forever. The sudden shift from fear to relief, from emptiness to human presence, from void to flame. Beyond physical safety, firelight also carried the power of memory. A traveler resting at an inn might recall his home hearth, the light of his own family's lamps. A soldier at camp might be reminded of festivals once celebrated in his village. A pilgrim might see in the fire their reflection of candles lit in churches or temples. Fire was never only in the present. It drew with it echoes of the past, weaving memory into the fabric of the journey. This was perhaps why people felt such attachment to the sight of lamps on the road. They were not only signals of shelter, but also reminders of continuity that wherever one traveled, the same flame connected all lives. As centuries passed, the traditions of firelight and travel persisted. The Ottoman Empire built caravanserais along trade routes, massive stone complexes where travelers schooled sleep, trade, and pray. Their courtyards were lit with lamps, casting patterned shadows against arches and walls. In China, way stations along imperial roads offered tea and rice to travelers beneath the glow of lanterns. In Japan, small roadside shrines often kept lanterns, burning to guide pilgrims on the Kumano Kodo or Tolkien visitors to hot spring towns. Though cultures differed, the meaning remained consistent. To travel by firelight was to belong to a greater chain of hospitality, to know that in the vastness of night, someone had prepared a place where light waited. Even today, echoes of this tradition remain. A traveler arriving late at a rural guest house might see a porch light left on, guiding him like the lamps of old. A highway diner glowing against dark landscape may feel like a modern inn, its neon not so different in spirit from the oil lamps of Roman roads. The technologies have changed, but the human need is the same. To see light on the road is to feel less alone. The chapter of Travelers by Firelight is, then, not only a story of ancient inns or medieval camps. It is a story of what light has always meant to those who venture beyond the familiar. It is the story of how fire creates, of belonging in seas of uncertainty, of how even the faintest glow can guide a weary soul to safety. To walk by firelight was to remember that no matter how vast the dark, there were always other lives nearby, other flames burning, other hands tending the wick. In this way, light was not only a physical guide but a moral one. A reminder that humanity thrives not in isolation but in connection. And so the image endures, a traveler, weary yet determined, stepping along a lonely road. The night presses in, vast and silent. But there, ahead, a glow appears, whether from an inn, a camp, or a single torch. It is enough. The flame flickers, the heart lifts, and the journey continues, strengthened by the quiet promise that light will always meet those who walk through the dark. The pursuit of knowledge has always required patience, and patience has always demanded light. Daylight gaveth world its clarity, but daylight was fleeting, slipping away with the sun. For students, teachers, philosophers, and scribes, the disappearance of the sun did not mean the disappearance of thought. Instead, it marked the beginning of another kind of intellectual landscape, one lit not by the brilliance of the sky but by the trembling flame of a lamp. In this subdued glow, letters were shaped, voices carried arguments, and knowledge itself was nurtured in the long patience of the night. For the ancient student, bent over a wax tablet in Greece or Rome, the lamp was not a luxury, but a companion. Its small pool of light defined the limits of their world. A section of polished wood, the wax smoothed and ready, and the stylus poised for careful incisions. The student leaned close, not only to see, but to protect the flame from sudden drafts. In the half-darkness of a courtyard or a cramped chamber, learning pressed on. Mistakes were made, words rewritten, and memory strengthened through repetition. The lamp stood silently at the edge of these efforts, its glow symbolizing endurance. As long as it burned, the mind could stretch beyond the boundaries of daylight. Philosophers, too, were drawn to the lamplight in Athens. The Stoics and Epicureans debated not only under the open sky but also in quiet chambers. Lamps flickered against the stone walls. The contrast of light and shadow mirrored the weight of their expertise. When Socratic questioning pushed a student into uncertainty, the wavering flame seemed to embody that same instability. When clarity was reached, the glow became steady. In perception, a subtle affirmation that truth had momentarily been found. In these dim gatherings, wisdom was not proclaimed in grandeur, but discovered in patience, under the same light that revealed every wrinkle of parchment, every crease of thought and a furrowed brow. In Alexandria, within the shadow of its great library, lamplight must have fallen across countless scrolls. Imagine the scholar unrolling papyrus late into the evening, eyes scanning rows of inked letters, pausing to make notes or dictate observations to an assistant. Each lamp there was a bridge between Teddy's work and the next dawn. Without it, the great project of collecting, cataloging, and comparing texts from across the known world would have faltered with every sunset. The flame extended the libraries, reached giving hours back to scholars who refused to surrender their inquiries to the rhythms of the natural world. Nor legates became dependent on these fragile reservoirs of oil and wick. The medieval scribe faced even greater challenges in the scriptoria of monasteries, where holy texts were copied by hand. Lamps were often the only source of illumination. Once twilight fell, bent over parchment, quill in hand, the scribe labored to reproduce for a curve of every letter. The flickering light made the task treacherous. A sudden sputter of the flame could send shadows sliding across the page, confusing the eye and leading to mistakes. Ink dried unevenly in the shifting heat, and the strain on the eyes was immense, yet the work persisted, for the lamp not only allowed it but symbolized its purpose. To preserve words was to preserve light itself, the light of scripture, the light of learning, the light of civilization's fragile memory. The act of writing by lamplight became its own metaphor. The page, blank and expectant, was like darkness itself, and each line inscribed upon it was like light cast into that void. Students and scholars alike felt this kinship between flame and knowledge. Both were fragile, easily extinguished by neglect or misfortune. Both required tending, patience, and reverence. A lamp left unattended went out. A mind left unstimulated grew dim. Thus, across centuries, lamplight became the quiet partner of intellectual persistence. In the Islamic Golden Age, where scholars gathered in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, lamps illuminated translations of Greek, Persian, and Indian texts. Physicians compared manuscripts by their glow. Astronomers sketched models of the heavens, and mathematicians traced formulas that would echo into modern science. The lamp here was not only a tool, but a witness to the birth of knowledge that would cross cultures and centuries. Late into the night, lamps burned as scholars wrestled with algebra, medicine, and philosophy. To them, light was more than a physical necessity. It was a symbol of the divine gift of reason, allowing the human mind to see further than instinct alone could carry it. In China, during the Han and Tang dynasty, students preparing for civil service examinations studied beneath the steady glow of oil lamps. These examinations were notorious for their rigor, demanding mastery of classical texts and poetry. To pass meant their chance of an official career. To fail meant obscurity. Families invested heavily in their sons' studies, and lamps often consumed large portions of household oil reserves. The flame was both sacrifice and hope. Each drop of oil burned for the possibility of success. Within the quiet of late-night rooms, brushstrokes filled paper with characters that represented centuries of tradition, all carried forward by the endurance of lamplight. The Renaissance revived ancient ideas, and once again, lamplight played its part. Humanist scholars, printers, and artists often worked late, driven by urgency to rediscover, replicate, and share knowledge. Printers' workshops glowed through the night, their presses clattering as apprentices stacked sheets, illuminated by candles and lamps. Each printed page was another fragment of light in a world that was slowly widening its horizons. The glow of the workshop was a promise that knowledge, once confined to the hands of a few, could spread outward to many. Without these nights of labor, without lamps feeding the ambition of minds and machines, the Renaissance would not have carried its flame so far. But lamplight was not always kind. Students complained of fees strained to the point of tears, of headaches brought on by long hours bent over text. Ink smudged when shadows tricked the hand. Errors crept into manuscripts when the flame sputtered unexpectedly, leaving words miscopied, meanings distorted. Even so, the very struggle against these inconveniences built resilience. To persist by lamplight was to prove dedication, to demonstrate that knowledge was worth discomfort. Many a scholar found pride not only in what he learned, but in the endurance of the process. In the memory of nights when only a single flame stood between him and surrender. In many cultures, the lamp itself came to symbolize love. In India, the image of the lamp is bound to Saraswati, goddess of wisdom. In Europe, the phrase carrying the torch of knowledge took root, linking illumination with the pursuit of truth. Universities, both ancient and modern, adopted lamps as part of their emblems, a visual reminder that the flame of inquiry must be passed from generation to generation. Even today, the graduation ceremony often speaks of enlightenment, a metaphor whose origins lie in those countless nights when students literally learned by the light of a lamp. We may also imagine the quiet intimacy of learning by lamplight, a child tracing letters on a slate, guided by a parent's patient instruction, a young poet drafting verses, pausing to hold the page closer to the flame, a philosopher writing marginalia in a precious manuscript, his thoughts captured in the dim hours when silence heralded each scene. Reminds us that knowledge grows not only in public halls and great libraries, but also in private, fragile moments, where the only witnesses are the learner, the page, and the lamp. The endurance of lamplight in learning was not about convenience. it was about devotion. Daylight offered abundance, but lamplight offered choice. To light a lamp at night and continue to study was an act of will, a declaration that knowledge was valuable enough to challenge fatigue and expense. Oil was costly, candles required careful tending, and eyes suffered strain. Yet people chose again and again to keep the flame alive. In that choice lay thesed of progress, for it proved that humanity's hunger for understanding was stronger than its weariness. As centuries turned, the arrival of brighter and steadier forms of light, gas lamps, electric bulbs, transformed the rhythm of learning. No longer did the scholar need to guard the fragile flame. No longer did shadows leap unpredictably across the page. Yet even with these changes, the image of the lamp persisted in memory and symbol. The electric bulb became another form of the same idea, a light for the mind, a continuation of that long tradition where thought resisted darkness. In reflecting on this history, we see that lamps in learning and writing were never merely about extending hours. They were about embodying the persistence of the human mind. A lamp's flame, however small, could hold open the gates of knowledge just a little longer. In its glow, entire civilizations preserved their words, their sciences, their faiths. Without such flame, much of human history might have been lost to shadow. And so, we return to the image with which we began. The student bent over the tablet, the philosopher debating in a dim courtyard, the scribe laboring in a monastery, the scholar in Baghdad translating Aristotle, the poet in China perfecting brushstrokes, the printer in Venice pulling sheets from Each figure is joined across time by the presence of lamplight, each one carrying forward the same quiet tradition. Knowledge, in all these moments, was inseparable from the flame. It burned, not brightly, not extravagantly, but persistently enough to guide, enough to endure, enough to remind us that light and learning have always belonged together. Festivals have always been humanity's way of pushing back against darkness. They are moments when ordinary life pauses, when work is set aside, and when communities gather to remember that joy is as essential to survival as food or shelter. And in these celebrations, lamps have so often been at the center. Their flames, small and humble in themselves, became radiant when multiplied. A single lamp might only brighten a corner, but dozens, hundreds, or thousands of them could turn an entire courtyard, street, or field into a landscape of living fire. This radiance was not merely for seeing, it was for feeling. It was warmth, togetherness, and reassurance. The flicker of flames in celebration reminded people that light was not only a tool of survival, but also a vessel of joy. In many ancient villages, festivals often began at dusk. Families would gather bundles of lamps, each carefully filled with oil and fitted with wicks, and carry them to the communal space. Children followed with excitement, balancing smaller lamps in their hands, while older members of the family steadied the heavier ones. The simple act of placing lamps in rows or circles created the first signs of festivity, transforming a bare courtyard into something extraordinary. Slowly, the darkness retreated, and in its place, a golden glow spread outward, welcoming everyone into its embrace. The first music would begin, perhaps a drumbeat or a flute, and the festival atmosphere would take form, inseparable from the glow of fire. Weddings were among the most common celebrations to feature rows of lamps. Across cultures, the joining of two families was marked by an outpouring of light. In India, the tradition of small clay lamps has long accompanied weddings. Their flames symbolized the hope for prosperity, happiness, and endurance. Placed along pathways, clustered near entrances, or floating on water, they created a sense that the couple's union was blessed not only by family and friends, but also by the universe itself. Each flame seemed to whisper a blessing, its quietest, reflecting the wish that the marriage would be equally steady and enduring. In the Mediterranean world, Roman and Greek weddings often used lamps as part of processions. A bride might be escorted through darkened streets by relatives carrying torches and lamps, the path to her new home made radiant by fire. These glowing processions turned what might otherwise be a quiet and private journey into a public declaration. Visible to the entire community, the flickering flames carried more than light. They carried meaning. They declared that joy should be shared, that love was not only a private bond, but also a celebration of social harmony. Without lamps, the procession would have been just a walk through shadows. With lamps, it became a vision of unity. Toward harvest festivals, too, were inseparable from lamplight. When the year's crops were gathered, gratitude had to be expressed, and lamps were among the first offerings to the gods, ancestors, or spirits believed to watch over the land. Farmers who had spent months under the hot sun now stood together. In the cool evening, their work behind them, their future secured by food stored away. Lamps placed on altars or along fields glowed as signs of thanks. Sometimes these festivals extended late into the night, with dancing, feasting, and song illuminated by the scattered flames. Unlike the harsh brightness of modern electric lights, these lamps cast a gentler radiance, one that encouraged calmness and intimacy even amid celebration. It was a reminder that joy did not need spectacle to be real. It needed only togetherness and the quiet assurance of fire. In East Asia, lamps became central to festivals that continue to this day. The Chinese Lantern Festival, marking the close of Lunar New Year celebrations, has its roots in traditions where lamps were lit not only to celebrate but to guide spirits, welcome prosperity, and symbolize renewal. Early versions of the festival featured simple oil lamps placed outside homes or temples, but as centuries passed, these lamps grew in number and artistry. Painted, carved, or shaped into animals, flowers, and celestial patterns, they turned entire cities into glowing works of art. While today we think of paper lanterns lifted into the sky or floated on rivers, their essence remains tied to the same principle. Lamps transforming darkness into radiance, guiding communities to celebrate not just the turning of the year but the endurance of joy itself. Similarly, in Japan, festivals such as Toro Nagashi involve floating paper lamps down rivers. Each lamp carries a prayer, a memory, or a wish. While often solemn in origin honoring the spirits oft departed, the act itself is also celebratory, transforming rivers into streams of light. Villagers gathered along the banks do not see only death remembered. They see community reaffirmed. Children laugh as they watch the glowing lamps drift away. Elders nod quietly at the beauty, and the river becomes a metaphor for the passage of time, dark yet bright, fleeting yet unforgettable. Celebration here was not loud or grand, but peaceful and profound, made luminous by the small lamps that carried collective memory. In Europe, seasonal festivals often used lamps to turn the harshness of winter into a space for festivity. On long nights when the cold pressed heavily against the walls of wooden homes, communities gathered with lamps and candles to mark solstices and holy days. Christmas, with its lights placed in windows and on trees, has roots in older traditions where lamps and fire symbolized hope that the sun would return. Lamps became symbols of survival, turning fear of darkness into trust that light would endure. And when these lamps were placed together lining church steps, encircling village greens, they transformed communal spaces into sanctuaries of warmth and togetherness. What is striking about lamps in celebration is their collective nature. A lamp alone was useful, even beautiful, but it was when many lamps were gathered that they reached their full potential. Rows of lamps along streets made ordinary pathways seem enchanted. Circles of lamps around dancers created stages of glowing intimacy. Lamps arranged in patterns or carried in processions told stories without words. Their power was not in their brightness but in their unity. Just as festivals reminded communities that they were stronger together, lamps reminded them that light was multiplied when shared. The emotional power of these scenes cannot be overstated. Imagine standing in a courtyard lit by hundreds of small flames, each one trembling slightly in the night air. Around you, neighbors are laughing, children are chasing each other, and music drifts upward into the sky, the flames reflecting people's eyes, making joy visible in every glance. In such a moment, the boundaries between individual and community dissolve. One does not merely witness celebration, one becomes part of it. The lamps themselves seem to insist that joy, like flame, is meant to be passed on, never hoarded, always shared. Unlike modern fireworks, which dazzle in their noise and spectacle, lamps celebrated with a quieter beauty. They did not demand attention through force but invited it through persistence. Fireworks blaze and vanish, lamps glow and endure. Their calm presence matched the rhythm of human gathering, offering light that did not overwhelm but in this way, lamps shaped the tone of festivals, joyous, yes, but also calm, reflective, and enduring. They created an atmosphere where both laughter and contemplation could coexist, where joy was deep rather than fleeting. The symbolism of lamps. in celebration also stretched beyond the immediate event. A lamp lit for a festival often carried the hope that light would extend into the days ahead. Couples lit lamps for fertility and harmony. Farmers lit them for continued prosperity. Entire villages lit them for peace and protection. In this sense, lamps were prayers embodied in flame, visible, tangible, and shared. They were both present, joy and future hope, making celebration an act not only of gratitude but also of trust. As civilizations grew and changed, so too did their celebrations. Yet the role of lamps remained steady. Even today, in cities filled with electric light, people return to the ritual of lamps during festivals. Candles are placed on birthday cakes, lanterns are carried during processions, oil lamps are still lit during Diwali, and memorial lamps glow at vigils. These practices echo ancient traditions, reminding us that celebration is not complete without light. The electric bulb may illuminate more brightly, but the lamp continues to carry meaning. Its flame is not only physical but emotional, a spark of memory that connects us to countless generations before. To consider lamps of celebration, then, is to see the ways light has bound communities together across time. From harvest fields to temple courtyards, from wedding processions to rivers filled with floating lanterns, lamps have been there, turning ordinary nights into extraordinary ones. Their beauty was never in extravagance, but in patience, in the quiet persistence of flame multiplied by community. They were reminders that joy does not need spectacle to be profound, that belonging can be felt in the simple act of standing together in light. In the end, lamps of celebration taught us something engendering, that while darkness is inevitable, it is never absolute. With even the smallest flame, multiplied by the hands of many, night can be transformed into a space of warmth, laughter, and memory. These lamps shout humanity, that joy is not only an emotion but also a practice, one we kindle, one we share, and one we keep burning together against the endless dark. Lamp making was itself a gentle craft, one that combined patience, practicality, and quiet artistry. It did not demand grandeur, nor did it require the vast resources of palaces or temples. Instead, it belonged to ordinary handspotters in their workshops, metalworkers at their forges, and glassmakers at their furnaces, shaping vessels that would one day glow with firelight. To make a lamp was to create a container for something both fragile and eternal, flame. And though every lamp was different, from the simplest clay dish to the most intricate bronze casting, they all carried within them the same purpose: to hold light, to tame it, and to make it useful to human life. The art of lamp making reminds us that the objects we now see as archaeological remains were once living tools, warm to the touch, placed on tables, carried through streets, and passed carefully from hand to hand. To understand these lamps is to glimpse the daily patience of those who shaped them, imagining not grandeur, but the quiet usefulness of a tool that would touch every evening. The journey of a lamp often began with earth itself. In the earliest communities, clay was gathered from riverbanks, dug out from damp soil, or collected from pits, where it was known to settle in rich deposits. This clay, sticky and heavy when first pulled from the ground, was kneaded between the palms until it became pliable. The potter's hands were essential toolshed, pressing and folding the clay again and again to remove stones, air pockets, or imperfections. In this simpler rhythm of touch, the lamp began to take form. Some lamps were little more than shallow dishes, their rims pinched inward to create a spout for a wick. Others were more carefully shaped, rounded into small bodies with nozzles, but even the plainest of them required thought. How wide should the bowl be to hold oil? How narrow the lip to steady the flame? How firm the base to stand without tipping? In each of these decisions, Thepatar balanced function with form, ensuring that the lamp would serve its purpose long after the clay left the shaping hands. Once molded, these clay lamps were left to dry in the open air before being hardened in a kiln. The firing process was both simple and complex. Too much heat, and the lamp could crack. Too little, and it would remain fragile, easily broken in daily use. The kiln was thus not only a furnace, but also a teacher, demanding that the potter learn patience and precision. When the lamps emerged, they carried the transformation of earth into stone, of soft clay into durable vessel. Their surfaces often bore the faint fingerprints of their meters, ridges, and impressions left behind, almost as if the potter's presence still lingered. To hold such a lamp today is to feel, quite literally, the touch of another human across centuries, a reminder that even the simplest tools carry traces of care. Decoration came next, though it was never essential. Some lamps were left plain, their value lying entirely in utility. Others, however, bore markings pressed into the clay. While still damp, Simplene's dots or spirals formed repeating patterns along rims. In certain cultures, figures were stamped into Thebes, animals, flowers, or mythological symbols. These decorations were not necessarily for show. Often, they were quiet expressions of belief, identity, or beauty woven into the fabric of everyday life. A farmer might own a lamp marked with wheat sheaves, a fisherman one with waves, a soldier one with the likeness of a deity. The lamp thus became more than a vessel. It became a small reflection of the person who owned it, carrying not only oil, but also fragments of meaning. As societies grew wealthier, lamps were made not only from clay, but also from more enduring materials. Bronze offered strength and elegance. To shape a bronze lamp required skill in metalworking, melting copper and tin, casting the mixture into molds, polishing surfaces until they gleamed, and attaching delicate handles. These lamps could be engraved with intricate scenes, hunters chasing deer, gods and goddesses in miniature, or patterns resembling woven fabric. Their nozzles might be extended and curved, their bodies fashioned into animals or birds. Glass lamps, though rarer and more expensive, added a sense of transparency to fire, allowing the flame to glow through walls of color, green, blue, amber, or clear as water. The principle, however, remained unchanged. Whether clay, bronze, or glass, each lamp was a vessel for light, built with the same intention of steadying flame and serving human need. The making of a lamp was not only a craft, but also a rhythm of life. Workshops in ancient towns often produced them in archaeological sites reveal shelves of unfinished lamps, discarded molds, and fragments of broken pieces swept into corners. This suggests that lamps were not precious rarities, but everyday necessities, produced at Diddley and in abundance. Yet within this abundance, no two were ever quite the same. Variations in shape, glaze, or carving made each lamp carry its own quiet individuality. To light a lamp in one's home was thus to use as something that bore the unmistakable touch of human labor, an object born of earth, fire, and hand. Holding a lamp today is to be reminded of the patience it embodied. Modern lights appear at the flick of a switch, manufactured by machines in identical rows, but a handmade lamp carries with it slowness, the time of gathering clay, of shaping, of firing, of waiting. Its existence depends on hours of work and care, on the balance between too much heat and too little, between fragile form and lasting strength. The person who held it first, centuries ago, would have understood this slowness not as inconvenience, but as the natural pace of creation. Tatham the lamp was not merely an object, but an outcome of harmony between human effort and the materials of the earth. In wealthier homes, the artistry of lamps was more pronounced. Bronze lamps often bore handles shaped like animals or mythological figures. Lions crouched along their rims, birds stretched their wings to form handles, dolphins curved their bodies into elegant spouts. These designs were not only decoration but also symbols of power and taste. To display such a lamp on a banquet table was to show refinement, education, and guests seated in lamplight would notice not only the flame but also the craftsmanship, perhaps commenting on the artisan's skill or the beauty of the design. In this way, lamps became subtle participants in social life, objects through which hosts expressed their identity and standing. Yet, even at the most modest level, lamps always remained rooted in simplicity. A clay dish, hastily shaped and unadorned, could illuminate a room just as well as a bronze masterpiece. For the majority of people, this plainness was not a deficiency, but a practicality. The lamp was a tool, used daily, replaced when broken, carried with ease, and in this ordinariness lies its quiet beauty. It reminds us that art need not always strive for spectacle. Sometimes, art is the shaping of clay into a form so natural, so functional, that it becomes invisible in its perfection. The art of lamp making was, in this sense, not separate from life, but woven into it, inseparable from the rhythm of evening light. Across civilizations carried different styles, yet its essence remained strikingly universal. In Mesopotamia, early lamps were open bowls, their flames exposed to the air. In Greece, lamps evolved into closed bodies with nozzles for wicks, designed to steady the flame against wind. In Rome, lamps were often mass-produced using molds, allowing for repeated patterns and wide distribution. In the Middle East, intricate teasings reflected Islamic art's love of geometry and calligraphy, turning lamps into glowing texts of devotion. Each culture left its mark on the form, yet none abandoned the basic idea: a small vessel for oil and flame, shaped carefully by human hands. This universality reveals something profound about lamp making. It shows that, across time and place, people turned to the same simple craft to meet the same need. They could have a kosan, other methods, torches, bonfires, hearths, but lamps endured because they combined practicality with intimacy. A torch might light a path, but could not be safely placed beside a child at study. A bonfire could warm a crowd, but could not brighten a single room. The lamp alone offered that balance: safe, small, portable, enduring. And behind every lamp was the quiet artistry of its maker, someone who understood not only how to shape material, but also how to serve life's simplest rhythms. Even broken lamps carried meaning. Archaeologists find fragments scattered across ancient homes and streets. A cracked handle, a broken nozzle, a half-preserved basil tell stories of use, of evenings long gone. These fragments remind us that lamps were not museum pieces when first created. They were dropped, repaired, replaced, passed from one hand to another. Their fragility was part of their nature, yet so too was their persistence. In breaking, they remind us of their arbitrariness. In surviving, they remind us of their endurance. The art of lamp making thus extends not only to creation, but also to the way these objects lingered, even when damaged, in the spaces of human life. To reflect in lamp making today is to sense a connection with those who shaped them. Their craft was not loud or boastful. It was slow, repetitive, and often humble. Yet within that humility lay something enduring. Every lamp, no matter how plain, represented a decision to create light where there was none, to shape earth and metal into tools, self-comfort and survival. The potter at the wheel, the smith at the forge, the glassmaker at the furnace, each played a part in a tradition that stretched across millennia. Their work reminds us that history is not built only of great monuments or battles, but also of small objects, patiently made, that touched daily life in quiet but essential ways. In the end, the art of lamp making was not only about the objects produced, but about the spirit they carried. They embodied patience, usefulness, and care. They bore traces of hands that shaped them, of lives that touched them, of nights they illuminated. To hold one today is to touch across time, to feel both the fragility and the endurance of human craft. And in that touch, we are reminded that light has always been a partnership between Atcher and Handoil, and flame, vessel and maker, darkness and glow. Lamps were never grand monuments, yet here art was one of the most enduring, for it created the conditions in which human life could be lived, celebrated, remembered, and cherished. When the first lamps were lit in an ancient room, the flame did more than brighten the air. It drew lines across walls. It painted surfaces with light and darkness, always shifting, never still. The lamp itself was steady, oil rising through the wick in its patient rhythm, yet what it produced was alive. Across clay walls, plaster idings and wooden beams, shadows began their endless dance. People in the ancient world lived not only with firelight, but with these shadows as constant companions of evening. They knew that flame was never silent. It spoke in smoke, it whispered in warmth, and it sang in patterns cast onto stone. For children, shadows were entertainment. When night came, the simple glow turned plain walls into theaters of imagination. A hand moved close to the flame, and suddenly a bird spread its wings, or a dog leaped across the surface. Little games passed from father to son, from mother to daughter, gave laughter to evenings where toys were scarce. Shadows made the house playful. They encouraged imagination, even in places where life was difficult. A child might stare for an hour at a shifting corner, convinced the movements were spirits, or that a story was unfolding silently upon plaster. The shadows gave companionship, even when no words were spoken. For adults, however, the flickering darkness often carried meaning. Some believed shadows were messages from the divine. The Greeks and Romans, especially, thought that light and dark could hold omens. If a flame wavered strongly, and shadows lengthened in strange forms, It could be taken as a sign perhaps of storm, perhaps of fortune. In temples, shadows were even more dramatic. High walls caught every curve of motion. Priests walking past, a row of lamps saw their forms stretched and distorted, like giants moving in slow procession. Two ordinary worshippers. These images were not illusions, but signs of the unseen powers shaping the world. At the same time, shadows had a calming presence. They softened the sharpness of the day. Under the sun, everything was clear, and every stone, every tool, every field had to be seen and tended. But under lamplight, clarity dissolved. The hard edges of the world gave way to suggestion. A jug became a silhouette, a stool became a soft outline, and even the rough cracks in the wall smoothed into quiet shapes. The room became less about labor and more about rest. People could relax within imperfection, comforted by the knowledge that not everything needed to be sharply defined. In wealthier homes, where walls were painted with frescoes, shadows added another layer to the artwork. Imagine a dining room in Pompeii, decorated with scenes of gods and heroes. As lamps were lit, the painted figures began to stir. A flicker across the face of Apollo could make him appear to smile, or to frown. A passing shadow might give movement to the painted drapery of a goddess. The art itself was fixed, but the light made it living. To sit in such a room was to share company with both art and shadow, with both memory and imagination. The practical mind also knew how to use shadows. Merchants weighed goods by lamplight, and the angle of the flame created shadows that helped them read scales more clearly. Scribes working late into the night adjusted their lamps to avoid long shadows falling across the wax tablets. Builders could even judge its straightness of a wall by the evenness of the shadow it cast. In this sense, shadows were not only mysteries, but tools part of daily practice. But it was in silence that shadows spoke most deeply. When the house grew still and all work was set aside, people would lie in their beds, staring at the faint flicker upon the ceiling. This slow dance became a lullaby for the eyes. There was no rush, no sharp burst of brilliance. The movement was endless, but gentle, never quite repeating. Like the rhythm of breathing, it carried minds into dreams. The lamp might eventually go out, but the memory of shadow lingered, easing the passage into sleep. Philosopher Socrates used shadows as metaphors. Plato, in his famous allegory, imagined people chained in a cave, watching only shadows, mistaking them for reality. Though this story carried a moral about truth and illusion, it was also rooted in daily experience. Everyone in the ancient world knew what it meant to watch shadows. Two C-shapes appear and vanish upon the wall. The allegory only worked because the sensation was familiar. Shadows were part of the intellectual fabric of life, a common image drawn from ordinary evenings. Yet not all shadows were welcome. In some households, especially in stormy nights, their shifting patterns could inspire fear. A sudden gust of wind made the flame leap, and with it the shadow grew monstrous. A cloak hanging on a peg might seem to stretch like a lurking figure. A jug could take on the form of a watching face. Children cried "And Ivan." Adults whispered prayers against wandering spirits. In these moments, the fragility of lamplight was exposed. Shadows, friendly in peace, became threatening in unrest. Light was comfort, but it was also fragile. The cultural memory of shadows was long. In myths, the idea of shade and shadow became linked with fuel of the dead. To the Romans, the umbra, the shadow, was the soul itself, lingering after death. Perhaps this came from long evenings watching shadows depart as the lamp burned low. When the flame faded, the figures vanished, as though slipping away into another realm. This quiet disappearance mirrored the passing of life. Shadows taught people, without words, that all things fade. But in daily practice, most shadows were simply companions. Farmers returning home from fields sat by the fire, their tired bodies eased by the quiet shapes on the walls. Fishermen mended their nets by faint lamplight, their tools surrounded by moving darkness. Women spinning wool or weaving cloth found comfort in the flicker, their hands repeating the old motions while the room seemed to sway gently with shadow. These were not grand events, but the rhythm of ordinary evenings carried forward generation after generation. Travelers, too, met shadows in every inn and roadside stop. A torch lit the door through long shapes across the ground, guiding them safely. Inside, a single lamp could fill the hollow room with restless movement. Strangers sat together, their faces half lit, half hidden, as if the shadows themselves were deciding what should be revealed and what should remain secret. The road by night was uncertain, but the presence of shadows meant that flame was near, and therefore safety as well. Even in Griachites, where hundreds of lamps glowed at once, shadows never vanished. Streets might shine with tavern light, or markets might sparkle with rows of small flames, but each person still carried their own private shadow. It walked beside them, stretched behind them, or flickered ahead. To walk in the ancient city at night was to walk with company both human and spectral, a reminder that darkness was never empty. In the end, the story of ancient light cannot be told without its partner, shadow. The two were inseparable. Every lamp, every torch, every fire gave birth to both brightness and darkness at once. People did not resist this duality. They accepted it. They knew that to enjoy light was also to live with shadow, to embrace the imperfections, the mysteries, and the soft uncertainties of flame. It gave evenings depth. It gave homes a quiet soul. And so, in countless forgotten houses, on walls that no longer stand, shadows once moved gently. They shifted over painted gods, over children's games, over the faces of men and women closing their eyes at the end of long days. Those shadows are gone now, just as the flames are gone, but the memory of them lingers in every ancient lamp discovered by archaeologists, its surface blackened by smoke. Each one reminds us that life was not only lived in light, but also in shadow. That rest, imagination, and reflection came not from brightness alone, but from the soft dance of flame upon the wall. The sounds of night in the ancient world were always softer than the day, yet never fully silent. When lamps were lit and darkness spread across fields, cities, and villages, it was as though the earth itself shifted into a slower rhythm. A clay lamp, though small, offered not only its glow but its voice. The faint hiss of a wick as it drew oil upward, the occasional soft pop as trapped air released from the liquid, and the low hum of burning fat or oil together created a sound that was never loud but never absent. To live with lamps was to live with a subtle chorus of fire. The flame consumed steadily, and in doing so whispered. This whispering blended naturally with her evening sounds, the crackle of a hearth, the shuffle of people finishing their last tasks, and the constant murmur of insects that thrived once heat fell away with the sun. The night was not the heavy silence Wezem at times imagined today, muffled by electric stillness and sealed windows. It was a living soundscape where human-made fire merged with the voices of nature. Those who sat near a lamp heard it not as distraction, but as prescience, a confirmation that the flame was alive, doing its work. Each hiss told them the oil was burning. Each small crackle reminded them that warmth and safety continued even as the sun had gone. In Thekantrizide, families often finished their meals by firelight, and with every passing moment, the human sounds lessened, while the natural ones increased. A child's laughter faded into drowsy yawns. The clinking of bowls gave way to the rustle of straw bedding being arranged, and over it all the insects began their constant chant. Cicadas droned in some lands, crickets in others, their rhythms blending with the flickering sounds of lamps, and occasionally a night bird called across the sky, a brief high note above the steady hum of the ground. To ancient ears, these sounds were not lonely, but familiar. They marked the world as alive. A dark night with no sounds would have been unsettling, but a night with insects, birds, and fire was a night that promised continuity. The same patterns as yesterday, and the same patterns tomorrow. The voices of the evening created continuity just as much as the glow of lamps did. In cities, night carried different music. Streets were narrower, houses closer together, and the echoes of footsteps or low conversations traveled far. Lamps at doorways or within taverns added their own small sounds, the hiss of wicks mixing with the clatter of cups, the dull tone of clay mugs meeting wooden tables, and the rhythmic rise and fall of laughter. Yet even there, behind these human noises, lamps sang softly with their steady burning. Walk past a row of houses and you would hear a chorus, not just voices, but of fire. Hundreds of small flames quietly consuming oil. The combined sound was not loud, but it gave a sense of presence, as though the city itself was breathing. This living soundscape was as much a marker of community as the light itself. To those returning late from work or travel, hearing these faint household murmurs was proof of safety. They told the traveler that life still stirred within the walls, that he was not walking through an empty void, but a place of warmth and belonging. Temples, too, carried their special kind of night sound. Eternal flames tended by priests rarely roared. They did not blaze like bonfires but glowed with measured steadiness. Their whispers were joined by the echo of sandals across stone floors, the faint jingling of ritual tools, or the murmur of prayers. Worshippers stepping into the sacred halls at night felt the union of sight and sound, the dim glow meeting the low hum of sacred chants, the smoke rising while the flame crackled gently. The temple's night was not noisy, but it was deeply alive, with reverberations that gave worshippers comfort. The sound of flame in a sacred space was not simply background. It was part of the divine presence itself, reminding Gul, who entered, that the gods heard not only words, but the sounds of devotion. Travelers resting at roadside Insa campsites lived among a different harmony of night. They listened to the shuffle of animals tethered nearby, the rustle of cloth as companions arranged bedding, the low voices of men sharing stories or counting coins, andibove, all the steady flicker of torches and small fires. A lamp left at an inn's doorway hummed quietly, its glow calling strangers in from the road. For the weary, that hum meant arrival. To fall asleep with the sound of a flame nearby was to know one was safe from total darkness. Without fire, night could feel like an endless, formless void. With fire, even the smallest sound reminded travelers that the human world still existed in the vastness of night. The flame was a heartbeat. The sound was its pulse. Children, especially, often remembered the sounds of flames. Their eyes grew heavy under the flickering glow, and the faint hissing lulled them into sleep as much as light itself. Parents might hum lullabies, but in the pauses between, it was the sound of fire that filled the rhythm of burning flame, broken by occasional tiny bursts, was like a natural cradle song passed down through generations. Even adults found comfort in this. Silence too deep could feel empty. Silence broken by flame felt like companionship. The lamp was both a guardian and a friend, whispering that all was well forthnight. Night was also a time when distant sounds traveled farther. Without the competing noise of day, the faintest murmur could be heard. This meant that even the smallest flame spoke to its surroundings. A hiss from a lamp on a quiet street might carry through the night air. The shuffle of sandals accompanied by the soft crackle of a carried torch could be heard long before the traveler appeared. This distance amplified the relationship between light and sound. People did not simply see a flame from afar. They often heard it before they reached it, and together, sight and sound shaped the memory of night. Across different cultures, this relationship was recorded in stories and poetry. Writers described lamps not only by their glow, but by their voices. Some compared the hiss to whispers from ancestors, others to the breathing of the earth. The language of fire was not abstract to them, but lived experience. They understood that light was never silent, and silence was never complete. Where there was flame, there was sound, and together they created the calm pulse of human evenings. Even in times of fear, sound and flame were allies. A watchman on city walls carried a torch not only to see Buto hear its crackle, reminding him he was not alone in the dark. Soldiers camping before a battle listened to the popping of wood and the steady burn of oil, taking courage from its constancy. Families sheltering during storms heard the howl of wind outside, but inside, the soft sounds of lamps reassured them. As long as that sound continued, life continued. When a lamp sputtered or threatened to die, anxiety rose, for its silence meant darkness. To rekindle the flame was to restore not only light, but also sound, and with it, peace. Thus, the night were more than background. They were the soundtrack of ancient evenings. They marked transitions, from work to rest, from meal to sleep, from fear to reassurance. They bound people to one another, because the hum of lamps filled every household. The flame was individual, but the sound was shared. Across vast distances, people lived with the same nightly whispers, the same quiet chorus of oil, wick, and fire blending with insects and birds. In remembering these sounds, we come closer to their world. A world where the hush of night was never silent, but always filled with the music of living fire. The act of sleeping beside a flame was both practical and symbolic in the ancient world, shaping not only the physical environment of the night, but also the inner landscape of those who rested. Long before the convenience of switches and bulbs, the transition into sleep was softened by the slow dimming of fire. Lamps stood as guardians in the darkness, glowing gently as families lay down to rest. They carried with them an air of companionship, of gentle continuity, reminding sleepers that the human world had not disappeared simply because the sun had gone. Even when most lamps were extinguished to conserve oil, often one was left burning low, its small flame serving as a sentinel through the night. This faint glow filled otherwise darkened rooms with a quiet presence, making the spaces seem less endless, less empty, less frightening. In a world where the night could feel immeasurable, with the threat of animals, spirits, or even simple accidents hidden in the blackness, this steady ember of light was a profound comfort. It was not only a source of illumination but of reassurance, easing the mind and body into rest. Children in particular found safety in these small flames. For them, the vastness of night was intimidating. The deep shadows of a corner or the silent stretch of a ceiling overhead capable of stirring the imagination into fear. The glow of a lamp softened these fears. It painted walls with warmth, filled corners with a gentle shimmer, and allowed them to drift into dreams without the sense of being swallowed by darkness. Parents understood this instinctively, for to remembered their own childhood. A flame by the bedside meant protection. In many homes, children slept closer to lamps, their small bodies turning instinctively toward the light as though drawn by an unspoken bond. The flame's low hiss or pop became part of their lullaby, a natural rhythm that worked alongside a mother's voice or the distant hum of insects outside. In this way, lamps shaped not just the waking life of families, but the very texture of their dreams. For adults, the lamp had a different meaning at night. While children sought it for comfort, adults recognized its practical necessity. To leave a flame burning meant a ready defense against total blackness if one woke suddenly in the night. A crying child, an unexpected visitor, a sick family member needing water. These were moments when absolute darkness would have brought fumbling, confusion, or even danger. The lamp answered this by being a quiet companion, always present, always steady. Its glow meant one did not need to stumble blindly across uneven floors, nor risk knocking over tools or stepping on unseen objects. In wealthier homes, a servant might be tasked with tending the flame through the night, refilling its oil or trimming its wick if it faltered. In humbler dwellings, the responsibility fell on parents, who knew the small flame was both protector and friend. They trusted it not to blaze uncontrollably, but to sit with quiet dignity through the long hours until dawn. The intimacy of sleep beside a flame also carried symbolic weight. Across cultures, fire was seen as alive, a being in its own right, a guest welcomed into the home. To allow it to remain while the family slept was an act of trust, as a lent agreement that this elemental force would remain loyal and protective rather than dangerous. Fire was unpredictable, yet contained in the lamp it became a quiet ally. Its breath, its whisper, its glow, these qualities made it feel like a presence. For many, this was a reminder of divine or ancestral spirits watching over them. The lamp was more than oil and wick. It was a thread connecting the household to forces larger than. Just as hearth fires were never fully extinguished in some cultures, so too were lamps kept alive. To ensure continuity between the living world and the spiritual realm. The psychology of sleeping with a flame is also deeply telling. Modern people often sleep in sealed darkness, with curtains drawn and electric lamps turned sharply on or off. For the ancients, night was never absolute. There was always a negotiation between darkness and light, a balance that lamps embodied. To fall asleep beside a flame was to ease gently into rest, not to sever the world abruptly into dark and silence. The lamp's glow dimmed naturally as oil burned down, and those drifting into sleep were carried with it. They fell asleep not to absence, but to presence, to the presence of warmth, of color, of life. Dreams born in such conditions were likely shaped by the steady shimmer of light, a reminder that sleep was not a lonely journey but one watched over by flame. In communal settings, such as in military camps, the lamp took on an even greater significance. Travelers sharing a room, strangers lying alone, another on mats, often found comfort in the shared glow of a lamp. Its flame reassured them that the space was safe, that all could rest without suspicion. In camps, soldiers sometimes left torches burning outside their tents, listening to the hiss of the fire as reassurance against enemies or animals in the dark. To lie down with fire nearby was to rest in a guarded world, where the flame was both sentinel and symbol. even for those who slept too easily. Waking to glance at the glow allowed them to fall back into slumber. The sound and sight together formed a pact with the night. There were, of course, dangers to this practice. A lamp left too close to bedding, or knocked over by careless movement, could turn comfort into catastrophe. Fires in ancient homes were not rare, and so families learned caution. Lamps were placed on sturdy stands, set in niches of walls, or placed in shallow bowls of water to reduce the risk of tipping. The flame was trusted, but trust came with careful boundaries. This of danger only deepened the intimacy of sleeping beside it. The flame was respected, never taken for granted, and its companionship was valued all the more because it carried both risk and safety. In this way, Felamp was not only a practical tool, but also a teacher of balance. To live beside fire was to live with responsibility. Rituals often surrounded the extinguishing or tending of lamps at night. In some cultures, prayers were said before putting the flame to rest, thanking it for its service during the day. In others, special words were when leaving it burning, asking it to watch over the family through the hours of darkness. These rituals were simple, often spoken softly by parents or elders, but they reflected a deep relationship between human and flame. The lamp was not treated as an object, but as a companion, part of the household's rhythm of life and sleep too. Extinguish it roughly or neglect it was to break that rhythm, to dismiss the bond. The presence of lamps also shaped how architecture and interiors evolved. Bedrooms or sleeping areas were often designed with nikisware. A flame could burn without endangering fabric or straw bedding. Wealthier homes built small shelves into walls near where families slept, ensuring that the glow of the flame reached across the room without risk. In temples or monasteries, monks and priests often slept with lamps at the foot of their beds, believing the steady light to be both protective and spiritually nourishing. The flame's presence shaped not just comfort but space itself, weaving human rest around its glow. Even in literature and poetry, the image of sleeping beside a flame appears as a recurring motif. Poets compared it to the watchfulness of a lover, the patience of a guardian, or the persistence of memory that endures through night. The flame was written of as a loyal friend, one who remained awake while the body rested, one who never abandoned its post until morning light relieved it. To wake in the middle of the night and see the flame still there was to feel reassured, as though the world had not dissolved into darkness, but continued to exist in quiet, patient glow. For many, this relationship endured into dreams. People reported visions of flames, of glowing halls, of firebirds or lamps that guided them through strange dreamscapes. That was as though the presence of a flame at the bedside entered the unconscious mind, becoming a companion of them in the landscapes of sleep. In this way, lamps shaped not only waking activity but the very texture of human nourished. They bridged the conscious and unconscious, the physical and spiritual, the visible and invisible. Thus, though practice of sleeping beside the flame reveals how deeply intertwined human life was with fire, it was never only about light or visibility. It was about comfort, safety, companionship, ritual, and imagination. It shaped homes, shaped emotions, and shaped dreams. To rest in its glow was to live with continuity, to know that even in their most vulnerable hours, one was not abandoned. The lamp was the silent watcher of the night, carrying families gently into slumber and waiting with them until dawn returned. At sunrise, the lamp's role gently ended, just as it had begun the evening before, with a soft gesture, a quiet motion, a simple but meaningful act that tied the lives of households to the great rhythm of the world. The flames that had kept watch through the night began to dwindle, their once strong glow now reduced to a faint flicker oil, slowly consumed over the long hours, left behind only a thin residue at the bottom of the vessel. Wicks blackened and curled upon themselves, exhausted from their service. This transition was unhurried. It did not come in a sudden extinguishing, but in the gradual surrender of fire to light, of flame to sun. As the first rays of dawn stretched into rooms, the lamps seemed to bow gracefully, their purpose completed, their duty fulfilled. The new day belonged to the sun, and so the lamps were set aside until dusk returned. In this cycle, endlessly repeated lamps became not just tools of necessity, but silent markers of time itself. They divided human life into visible chapters: the gathering of family at dusk, when they were lit; the safety and reflection of night, when they glowed; and the renewed confidence of morning, when they were extinguished. The act of putting out a flame carried its own weight of meaning. In some households, the flame was pinched carefully with wetted fingers, leaving behind a wisp of smoke that curled upward like a last whispered prayer. In others, the flame was left toady naturally, consuming its final drop of oil in a soft surrender that merged almost seamlessly with the arrival of the light. Either way, this moment symbolized closure. The lamp's extinguishing was not seen as an ending in despair, but as part of a cycle, a temporary pause in its companionship. The same lamp that was dark in Themening would glow again in the evening, reminding its owners of continuity, of patience, of the eternal return of night and day. This rhythm became so embedded in daily life that to imagine a household without it would better imagine a life without structure, without the gentle pulse of time marked by flame. For many, dawn itself was measured not by clocks but by this fading glow. A lamp's exhaustion signaled the approach of morning even before the cocks crow or the lifting of shadows outside. To wake and see the flame still alive was to know the night had not fully released its hold. To wake and find only a smoking wick was to feel the day had already begun. In monasteries, where prayers were tied to the hours, the extinguishing of lamps marked the transition between sacred offices, guiding monks as reliably as the ringing of bells. In rural cottages, where laborers rose early to work the fields, the fading flame served as the first sign that tasks awaited and daylight would soon fill earth. Even in cities, with their busier rhythms, the retreat of lamplight meant shops would soon open, markets would stir, and life would resume its public face. Thus, the lamp was not only a private comfort, but also a communal clock, binding human activity to the natural order. Yet there was always a quiet melancholy in the fading flame. Those who lingered at dawn, watching the last flickers dissolve, often felt a tender sadness at its departure. The lamp had been a companion through hours of silence, a witness to whispered conversations, midnight wakings, and fragile dreams. To see it shrink and vanish was to acknowledge that the night had passed down, could not be reclaimed. This melancholy was gentle, not despairing, an acknowledgement of impermanence, of the fleeting nature of all things. Just as evening carried with it the beauty of beginnings, dawn carried the beauty of endings, reminding people that both were necessary. The lamp's cycle of light and dark was a mirror of life itself, fragile, impermanent, yet endlessly renewed. The morning extinguishing also revealed a practical wisdom. Oil was precious, and so it was never wasted. Once daylight arrived, lamps were cleaned and set aside, their reservoirs emptied of remaining residue, their wicks trimmed and prepared for evening. This small ritual, often performed by women of the household or by servants, was itself a quiet form of devotion. To care for a lamp was to care for the household, to ensure that when night came again, there would be no stumbling in darkness, no fear of absence. Children watched these rituals with curiosity, seeing how their elders handled lamps with respect, almost reverence, as though the vessels were more than clay or bronze. Through such acts, values were passed from one generation to another: thrift, responsibility, attentiveness to the rhythms of time. The extinguishing of lamps thus became an education in patience and foresight. In many cultures, the extinguishing of a flame at dawn carried spiritual weight. Fire was seen as a living being, a messenger between worlds, and to put it out was an act requiring care. Some whispered thanks as the flame was pinched, honoring its service through the night. Others saw in the smoke a symbol of prayers rising, carrying with them the last houts of night into the new day. In temples, where lamps might burn throughout, both night and day, the cycle was slightly different, but even there, the fading of some flames at dawn marked transitions in ritual. Priests ended sacred fires with the awareness that their rhythm reflected cosmic order, and so the extinguishing of flame was not an accident but an offering, a gesture of harmony with the rising sun. As the flame vanished, attention turned outward. Once more, the sun reclaimed its place as the central source of light, and with it, communal responsibilities. The lamp's glow, warm and intimate, was replaced by the broad, impartial brightness of day. This shift symbolized a change in human focus, from family to community, from inward reflection to toward labor. The lamp belonged to the quiet, private hours of night. The sun belonged to the bustling publishers of day. To extinguish a lamp was to acknowledge this transition, to accept that night's softness had ended and the harder work of daylight had begun. But the lamp was not forgotten during the day. It rested in corners, in niches and cupboards, silent but ready, waiting for its next moment of service. Some lamps bore the stains of countless nights, their rims blackened by smoke, their body scratched from handling. They were not polished ornaments, but working companions, their wear itself a testament to their constancy. To see such a lamp resting in daylight was to see continuity itself, to be reminded that when evening returned, the ritual would begin again. In this way, the lamp remained a presence even in absence, shaping the structure of life, not only by its light but also by its cycles of silence. The fading flame also carried symbolic meaning in poetry, storytelling, and memory. Writers compared it to youth passing into age, to dreams dissolving upon waking, to the fragile line between life and death. Just as the lamp surrendered to dawn, so too did people surrender to time, their days marked by beginnings and endings that echoed the lamp's rhythm. To watch a lamp die was to meditate on impermanence, on the fleeting beauty of all things that burn bright for a time and then withdraw. This symbolism endured across centuries, showing how deeply the simple act of extinguishing a flame was woven into human consciousness. In some places, lamps were deliberately left burning into the early morning, not because light was needed, but because continuity was valued. Such lamps were symbols of endurance, of strength against the coming day. They spoke of households that wished never to be without flame, that saw in its survival through dawn a promise of resilience. In monasteries and temples, eternal flames embodied this same idea on a grander scale. But even in ordinary homes, the occasional lamp that defied the sun carried meaning, a small gesture of stubbornness against time, a reminder that light belonged to humans as well as to nature. Ultimately, the cycle of lamp and sun created a partnership, a dialogue between human-made light and the great celestial fire. At dusk, the lamps greeted the night with their fragile glow. At dawn, they yielded gracefully to the sun's overwhelming brilliance. Neither was complete without the other. Humans, caught between these two sources, learned to live in rhythm with them. The lamps taught patience, humility, and trust in cycles. The sun taught energy, labor, and the endless march of days. Together, they formed the bookends of human experience, shaping not only the structure of life, but the very way time was perceived. Thus, dawn and the fading flame were not merely moments in a household routine, but profound symbols of continuity, of impermanence, and of trust in the world's cycles. To watch a lamp's glow vanish into daylight was to witness the eternal balance between human fragility and natural power. Lamps did not resist the sun. They stepped aside, knowing their time would come again, and so they became patient partners in the turning of hours, embodying the quiet wisdom that all things have their season, and that endings are never final but always the beginning of something new. In the soft balance between flame and shadow, between the whisper of a wick and the silence of dawn, the story of the lamp unfolds not as an object's history, but as a mirror of human life itself. Through the long journey of these chapters, we have followed the lamp from its humble kindling at dusk, through the companionship it offered at night, to its quiet surrender at sunrise. Each stage revealed more than light. It revealed the rhythms of existence, the slow weaving of time, and the gentle ways in which simple things anchor human lives. To conclude, this reflection is not to close the story, for the lamp remains present, in memory and in metaphor, its glow continuing long after the flame has gone out. The lamp was never just a vessel of oil and wick, it was a vessel of human presence. In its circle of light, people gathered, read, prayed, worked, whispered, and rested. Families drew closer, not because the lamp demanded it, but because its glow made distance impossible. Shadows pressed in around the edges, urging bodies nearer, fostering a sense of belonging. In that intimate circle, voices softened, tempers cooled, and reflection deepened. The lamp shaped not only space but mood. It did not roar like the sun but breathed gently, reminding those around it that life, too, is sustained not by force but by steadiness. To speak of lamps is also to speak of sound. They hissed faintly as oil fed the wick, crackled when touched by dust or draught, sighed as they burned lower. These were not noises of disturbance but of reassurance, subtle reminders that life was still present in the room. Combined with the chorus of night thedron of insects, the call of birds, the whisper of wind, the lamp's quiet voice became part of the music of evening. Its glow was visible, but its presence was felt through sound. As well, a steady partner in the human negotiation with darkness. As night deepened, lamps became companions of dreams. Some were extinguished as families sought deep rest, leaving rooms dark and still. Others were left burning low, their faint glow offering comfort to children, the ill or the anxious. In such light, fears softened. The unknown vastness of darkness ranked to the size of a room, familiar and safe. Lamps guarded not with force but with presence. They did not prevent night from entering, but they reminded sleepers that even in darkness, something watched over them. In this way, the flame did not only illuminate work or conversation, it accompanied the most vulnerable of human errors when eyes closed and consciousness yielded. At dawn, lamps gracefully withdrew. Their flames, exhausted but dignified, yielded to the sun. To watch this transition was to watch the balance of nature, human-made light giving way to celestial light, fragility bowing before power, intimacy yielding to vastness. Yet this yielding was not defeat, but rhythm, an acceptance that everything has its hour. Lamps were not diminished by its sun's arrival. They were validated by their cyclical return. Each evening they rose again, proving that nothing truly ends, but waits for its time to begin anew. In their daily cycle, lamps became markers of time. They reminded households when to gather, when to rest, when to rise. They measured not minutes and hours, but Thudapa chapters of human experience. Work and rest, solitude and fellowship, silence and speech. Unlike clocks, they did not tick away existence, but illuminated it gently, allowing time to be felt rather than counted. In this way, lamps taught patience, for their glow could not be hurried, nor their oil stretched beyond its nature. They are a wisdom of slowness, of attentiveness, of acceptance. Beyond their practical role, lamps carried Laosof meaning that reached into the spiritual. Fire has always been seen as sacred, a bridge between worlds, a symbol of life itself. To light a lamp was to honor not only human need, but also divine presence. To extinguish it was not an act of waste, but a gesture of gratitude, a closing of a chapter with reverence. Smoke curling upward at dawn resembled prayers rising, ephemeral yet sincere. In temples, shrines, and homes alike, lamps stood as that light is both physical and metaphysical, both oil and meaning. The endurance of the lamp acrosculptures, centuries, and geographies speaks to its universal significance. Whether carved from clay, cast in bronze, or shaped from simple stone, its form varied little, because its purpose was eternal. Civilizations rose and fell, yet lamps continued to glow in the hands of shepherds, scholars, servants, and kings. Their simplicity, waist-high strength, they required little but gave much. They endured not because of grand design, but because they a quiet need shared by all humanity, the need for comfort in darkness, for order in chaos, for continuity in time. And so, the legacy of the lamp is not confined to the past. Even in an age where electricity banished night with a switch, where neon and screens overwhelmed the eyes, the memory of the lamp endures. Candles Aristeel lit in ritual, oil lamps still glow in temples, lanterns still burn in ceremonies. We return to them not because you need their light, but because we crave their presence. Their flame speaks a language electricity cannot, their language of fragility, of patience, of intimacy. To watch a flame is to watch life itself, flickering, fragile, yet radiant. The lamp teaches us that illumination is not only about vision, but about meaning. It reminds us that time is not a straight line but a cycle, that endings are beginnings, that darkness and light are not enemies but partners. It shows us that companionship can be silent, that reassurance can be fragile, that presence can be enough. Its glow, modest and steady, reflects the essence of human endurance, not brilliance, but constancy. Thus, in closing, we recognize that the story of the lamp is not the story of an object, but the story of humanity. It is the story of families gathered, of prayers whispered, of dreams sheltered, of mornings greeted. It is the story of yearning for warmth, for order, for hope. To remember the lamp is to remember that even the simplest of things can shape the deepest of lives. Its flame may fade at dawn, but its meaning does not fade. It remains, glowing quietly in memory, an eternal companion in the turning of hours.